Midnight, February 1952. Frost crawling up the inside of arched windows like something trying to get out. A hallway where every door faces another door across exactly 12 feet of cracked tile. Peeling paint, revealing older paint beneath. Green over yellow, over institutional white. Layers of decisions made by people who are all dead now. The smell of old paper rotting in flooded basements. The particular silence that happens when a building this large has been emptied of human voices but still echoes anyway. Between 1840 and 1980, America built 563 asylums for the mentally ill. You can find 486 of them. Tours, museums, luxury condos with exposed brick and original molding. The other 77 were erased. Not abandoned, erased. Records destroyed, blueprints missing, removed from county maps like they never existed at all. Were they hiding medical malpractice? Architectural failures that killed patients faster than the diseases they came to treat? Or did something happen inside those walls that made forgetting easier than remembering? Tonight, we're walking through buildings that don't exist anymore. Get comfortable. This is going to take a while. Fact number 1. The Kirkbride Plan, 1848. Trenton, New Jersey. Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride stands in an empty field, holding blueprints for what he believes will be the most humane mental hospital ever built. A single linear corridor, 600 feet long, with wings extending at precisely 135-degree angles like a bird in flight, natural light from every angle, fresh air circulation through a central heating system that cost $18,000, roughly $670,000 in today's money. Maximum capacity, 250 patients. Room for dignity, he said. Room for recovery. By 1876, the Trenton State Hospital held 600 patients. By 1900, over 1,400. The humane architecture Kirkbride designed became a warehouse. His published guidelines, all 334 pages of on the construction, organization, and general arrangements of hospitals for the insane, specified 1 attendant per 8 patients. Reality delivered 1 attendant per 80. Was Kirkbride naive about human nature? Or did he understand exactly what would happen and build the best prison he could disguise as hope? The blueprints survive. His private journals don't. Fact number 2. The model they copied 300 times. Harrisburg State Hospital, Pennsylvania. Opened 1851. Construction cost $387,000, approximately $14.2 million today. This wasn't just another asylum. This was the template. Over the next 50 years, 73 Kirkbride Plan hospitals were built across America, and at least another 230 institutions borrowed elements of the design. The V-shaped wings, the administrative center, the gender-segregated wards with the most disturbed patients placed farthest from the entrance, out of sight. The building was designed to be self-sufficient. Its own farm, dairy, bakery, coal-fired power plant. Patients worked the fields as moral therapy. Harrisburg's farm produced 40,000 pounds of potatoes annually by 1880. The labor was free. The patients weren't paid. The hospital administrators called it therapeutic. The patients called it something else, but nobody wrote down those words. Harrisburg closed in 2006. The main building still stands, empty, windows broken, slowly collapsing under its own moral weight. Fact number 3. The one that changed mid-construction. Northampton State Hospital, Massachusetts. Groundbreaking. April 1856. Originally designed as a pure Kirkbride, then halfway through construction, the state legislature cut funding by 40%. The architect had a choice: build half a hospital or redesign on the fly. He chose redesign. The wings got shorter, 420 feet instead of 600. Ceilings dropped from 12 feet to 9 feet 6 inches. Windows shrank. The central heating system was replaced with individual coal stoves in each ward, which meant patients in restraints could smell themselves burning if they got too close. 3 died that way in the first winter. 1,858. The official cause of death was listed as accidental combustion, a term that doesn't appear in any medical textbook before or since. The building operated until 1993. During demolition in 2006, workers found notebooks hidden in the walls, patient diaries, written in pencil on stolen paper, Most were illegible. One sentence was clear. They changed the building while we were inside it. Make of that what you will. Fact number 4. The only federal asylum for Native Americans. Canton, South Dakota. The Canton Asylum for Insane Indians opened in 1902. Capacity, 100 beds. Actual peak population, 89 patients in 1929. It was the only federal asylum specifically built for Native Americans, most of them declared insane for practicing traditional religion or refusing to assimilate. The annual death rate was 9.3%. The national average for all asylums at the time was 2.1%. In 32 years of operation, 121 patients died. Tuberculosis, mostly. Also neglect. Also despair, though that's not a medical diagnosis. Dr. Harry Hummer ran the facility for 31 years. He had no psychiatric training. He was a general practitioner who took the job because it paid $3,000 annually, about $94,000 today. In 1929, inspectors found patients sleeping on floors, no heat in winter, food budgets diverted to staff salaries. One patient had been in solitary confinement for 4 years. The asylum closed in 1934. Hummer was never charged with anything. The building was demolished in 1973. The exact location was removed from USGS topographical maps sometime between 1975 and 1982. Nobody seems to know why. Fact number 5. Built over a winter village. Oregon State Hospital, Salem. Construction began 1,880 on land purchased from the federal government for $1.25 per acre. The deed made no mention that the site was a Kalapuya winter village, occupied seasonally for approximately 800 years before white settlement. During excavation for the basement, workers uncovered fire pits, tool caches, and what the foreman's log described as numerous bone fragments of indeterminate origin. The bones were reburied on-site, under the foundation. No archaeological survey was conducted. This was legal in 1880. The hospital opened in 1883. Over the next century, staff reported cold spots in the basement morgue even in summer. Temperature readings from 1,954 show the morgue averaged 58 degrees Fahrenheit, while outside temperatures reached 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The hospital's chief engineer blamed inadequate insulation and groundwater seepage. Maintenance records show 47 replacement heating units installed in the basement between 1,920 and 1,975. Far more than any other section of the building. Either the Kalapuya spirits were unhappy, or the hospital was built on a natural cold sink. Both can be true, neither can be proven. Fact number 6. The burial mound in the basement. Taunton State Hospital, Massachusetts. April 1854. Excavation crews hit something 14 feet below ground level. A mound of shells, bone fragments, and stone tools. The site foreman recognized it immediately as a Wampanoag burial mound, common in the region. He had 3 choices: stop construction and notify authorities, which would delay the project by months; excavate carefully and relocate the remains, which would cost money the state didn't allocate; or keep digging. He kept digging. The construction logs, preserved in the Massachusetts State Archives, record the removal of 37 complete skeletal remains and assorted fragmentary materials. They were placed in unmarked wooden crates and buried in a potter's field 3 miles away. No Wampanoag representatives were consulted. This was also legal in 1854. The hospital's basement flooded repeatedly over the next 140 years. Maintenance reports cite unknown subsidence, causing the eastern foundation to sink 11 inches between 1,860 and 1,920. Geological surveys found no explanation. The water table was stable. The bedrock was solid. Taunton closed in 1975. The building was demolished in 2009. During demolition, workers found human teeth in the sub-basement, embedded in the clay. The foreman who found them didn't report it. He just filled the hole and kept working. Some things you leave buried. Fact number 7. The fire that killed 47. Maybe. Blackwell's Island Asylum, New York City. December 2nd, 1858. Fire broke out in the women's wing at approximately 2 a.m. The building was wood frame construction, painted with oil-based paint, heated by coal stoves on every floor. Mortise locks on patient room doors required iron keys, held by a single night attendant responsible for 80 patients across 3 floors. By the time she reached the 3rd floor with the keys, the stairwell was impassable. Official death toll, 47 women. Unofficial estimates run higher. The Asylums patient register for December 1,858 lists 132 women in residence on December 1st. The January 1,859 register lists 71 women, that's 61 missing. The city coroner's report explains 47 deaths by fire and 14 transfers to other facilities. Records of those transfers don't exist in any other New York asylum's logs. The building burned to the foundation in 37 minutes. Firefighters later testified that wooden structures of that size typically take 15 minutes from ignition to structural collapse, assuming accelerants aren't involved. No investigation into arson was ever conducted. The asylum was rebuilt in brick in 1860. It operated until 1894. The death records from that December night are missing from the city archives. They were either lost, destroyed, or deliberately removed. Which explanation helps you sleep better? Fact number 8. The arson they couldn't prove. South Carolina State Hospital, Columbia. March 14, 1890. Fire started in the laundry building at 4:30 a.m. and spread to the men's ward. Official death toll, 22 patients. The hospital superintendent, Dr. J. W. Babcock, suspected arson immediately. The laundry's coal furnace had been inspected the previous day and found in good working order. Fire investigators found scorch patterns inconsistent with accidental ignition. 3 witnesses reported seeing an unidentified man near the laundry building around 4 a.m. He was never located. Dr. Babcock believed the fire was set by a former employee who'd been terminated for patient abuse 2 weeks earlier. That employee had an alibi. He was in jail in Charleston for public drunkenness, arrested at 11 p.m. on March 13th, released at 8 a.m. on March 14th. The timeline made it impossible for him to travel the 110 miles from Charleston to Columbia, set the fire, and return, unless he had an accomplice. No charges were ever filed. The hospital rebuilt the men's ward in 1892. Between 1890 and 1920, the hospital experienced 9 more fires, far above the statistical average for institutions of similar size. After 1920, when the state installed a full-time fire watch, the fires stopped completely. Either someone had a 30-year grudge, or the building had terrible luck. The fire marshal's reports don't speculate. They just list causes as undetermined. Fact number 9. The official count they disputed. Bryce Hospital, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. November 7th, 1894. Fire in the women's dormitory. The building had 2 exits, the main stairwell and a rear fire escape added in 1889. The fire escape was wooden. It collapsed under the weight of fleeing patients, sending 11 women to their deaths on the ground below. Official death toll, 31 patients. But the hospital's patient census the day before the fire listed 487 women in residence. The census the day after listed 443 women. That's 44 missing, not 31. The hospital administration explained the discrepancy as a clerical error. 13 women had been transferred to another facility the morning of the fire before it started, but the transfers weren't recorded until after. Transfer paperwork from the receiving facility shows only 6 women arrived on November 7th. Where did the other 7 go? The state investigator accepted the hospital's explanation without examining the receiving facility's records. His report concluded with no evidence of administrative negligence or intentional wrongdoing. The women's dormitory was rebuilt in brick in 1896. It included 3 staircases and 2 external fire escapes, also brick. Bryce Hospital still operates today. The 1,896 women's building was demolished in 1968. No memorial was erected for the women who died in 1894. Their names are recorded in the death register, but the register is closed to public access. Fact number 10. Where they sterilized Carrie Buck. Western State Hospital, Staunton, Virginia, October 19th, 1927. Carrie Buck, age 21, was sterilized against her will under Virginia's Eugenical Sterilization Act of 1924. She was declared feeble-minded based on a Stanford Binet IQ test that scored her at 50. The threshold for moron was 70. For imbecile, it was 50. Her mother, Emma Buck, was also institutionalized and also sterilized. Her daughter, Vivian, would later make the honor roll in elementary school before dying of an intestinal infection at age 8. 3 generations. One Supreme Court case, Buck v. Bell, decided 8-1 in favor of the state. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the opinion. 18 words. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Carrie's IQ test was administered by a psychologist who spent 30 minutes with her. Modern reviews of the test questions show cultural bias. She was asked to define Mars, the planet, Scrooge from Dickens, and majesty, a concept. She was the daughter of poor, uneducated parents in rural Virginia. She'd never been taught those words. The hospital sterilized 1,000 patients between 1,924 and 1,972. Virginia sterilized 8,300 total. 32 states had eugenics laws. Approximately 60,000 Americans were sterilized before the laws were repealed in the 1,970 seconds. Carrie Buck died in 1983. She was never told why she couldn't have more children. She assumed it was a medical problem. Fact number 11. 8,000 sterilizations, records partially destroyed. Lynchburg Training School and Hospital, Virginia. Opened 1,911 as the Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded. Between 1,924 and 1,979, the facility sterilized approximately 8,000 patients. Most were women, most were poor. Many were admitted for reasons unrelated to mental illness. Pregnancy out of wedlock, prostitution, poverty. The hospital kept meticulous records, patient names, dates of sterilization, authorization signatures, surgical notes. In 1983, as state archivists prepared to transfer the records to the Virginia State Library, a fire broke out in the records storage building. Approximately 40% of the sterilization files were destroyed. The fire was ruled accidental, caused by faulty electrical wiring in a building that had passed inspection 6 months earlier. No accelerants were found, but the building was fully engulfed within minutes, too fast for firefighters to save the files. The surviving records show sterilizations performed on girls as young as 13. One entry from 1,934 reads, "Patient admitted for moral delinquency. Father states she is boy crazy. Sterilized per court order. She was 14. The records that survived are now public. The ones that burned contained the names of prominent Virginia families who had daughters quietly sterilized and released. We'll never know who they were, unless the fire wasn't accidental. Then someone definitely knows." Fact number 12. The children they sterilized. Sonoma State Hospital, California. Opened 1,891 as the California home for the care and training of feeble-minded children. Between 1,909 and 1,952, at least 1,400 patients were sterilized under California's eugenics laws. The youngest on record was 6 years old, sterilized in 1918 for hereditary feeble-mindedness, a diagnosis based on the fact that her mother was illiterate and her father was an alcoholic. The surgery was performed by tubal ligation. She spent the rest of her childhood at Sonoma, was released at 18, and died in 1963 without ever knowing what had been done to her. California sterilized more people than any other state, over 20,000 between 1,909 and 1,963. Sonoma was one of the most aggressive facilities. Doctors there published papers in eugenics journals, arguing that sterilization should begin in early childhood before defective traits manifest fully. In 2003, the California State Legislature issued a formal apology. In 2021, the state began offering reparations, $25,000 per verified survivor. As of 2024, fewer than 50 survivors had been located. Most are dead. Their sterilizations are noted in medical files stored in a climate-controlled archive in Sacramento, sorted alphabetically, each file a name and a number and a reason that seemed logical at the time. Fact number 13. Where they perfected malariotherapy. Street Elizabeth's Hospital, Washington, D.C., 1922. Dr. Benjamin Malsberg begins infecting syphilis patients with malaria. The logic: syphilis bacteria can't survive high fevers. Malaria causes high fevers. Therefore, controlled malaria infection will cure syphilis. Austrian psychiatrist Julius Wagner-Jaureg won the Nobel Prize in 1927 for this exact treatment. By 1930, malariotherapy was standard practice in 47 American asylums. Street Elizabeth's became the research center, training doctors from across the country. The procedure: patients were infected via mosquito bite or direct blood injection with Plasmodium vivax, the mildest malaria strain. Fevers reached 104 to 106 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained for 6 to 8 hours, repeated every 48 hours for up to 3 weeks. Mortality rate: 15% died from the malaria treatment itself, but untreated syphilis was 100% fatal in its late stages, so the math seemed to work. St. Elizabeth's performed malariotherapy on 1,200 patients between 1,922 and 1,943. Of those, 180 died during treatment, 400 showed improvement, 620 showed no change. The remaining numbers aren't clear because record keeping was inconsistent. Penicillin became available in 1943. Malariotherapy stopped immediately. The mosquito breeding lab in the basement of Building 7 was closed. The files were archived. Some survive. Others were lost during a facility reorganization in 1987. Fact number 14. The largest asylum in the world, Pilgrim State Hospital, Brentwood, New York. Opened 1,931 on 825 acres of former farmland. At its peak in 1954, Pilgrim housed 13,875 patients, the largest psychiatric hospital ever built. It had its own power plant, water supply, farm, cemetery, fire department, and police force. It was a city of the insane, surrounded by 30 miles of underground tunnels connecting 60 buildings. The tunnels were for steam pipes and utilities, but patients used them too, runaways mostly. In 1948, a patient disappeared for 6 weeks. He lived in the tunnels, eating food stolen from the kitchen's underground loading dock. When he was finally caught, he'd lost 40 pounds and couldn't remember his name. Pilgrim also tested insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive therapy, and malariotherapy. Between 1,935 and 1,955, over 2,000 lobotomies were performed on-site. The surgical theater had stadium seating for medical students to observe. The hospital's cemetery contains approximately 9,000 graves. Most are marked with numbers, not names. Pilgrim closed most of its buildings in the 1,990 A small psychiatric facility still operates on part of the campus. The tunnels remain. Urban explorers occasionally post videos. They describe the same thing: long corridors, rusted gurneys, and a persistent smell like old wet wool. One explorer claimed to hear footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, no one was there. Acoustics in underground tunnels can play tricks. Or maybe someone's still down there, still running. Fact number 15. The malaria and insulin shock combination. Rockland State Hospital, Orangeburg, New York. Opened 1,931, just months after Pilgrim. Capacity: 5,000 patients. It quickly became overcrowded. By 1940, over 8,000 patients were crammed into buildings designed for 5,000. Rockland's doctors experimented with combination therapies: malaria to treat syphilis, followed by insulin shock to treat schizophrenia, followed by electroconvulsive therapy to reset the brain. Patients underwent all 3 treatments in sequence, sometimes within the same week. Insulin shock therapy involved injecting patients with enough insulin to induce hypoglycemic coma. Blood sugar would drop so low, the brain would shut down. After 20 to 60 minutes, glucose was administered to revive them. The theory was that the coma rebooted malfunctioning brain chemistry. Mortality rate for insulin shock: 1 to 5% depending on the study. At Rockland, where patients were already weakened by malaria treatment, the rate was higher. Hospital records from 1,938 show 47 deaths during insulin therapy out of approximately 600 treated that year. That's 7.8%. The treatment was discontinued in 1960 when antipsychotic medications became widely available. Rockland is still operational, though significantly downsized. The insulin shock treatment wing, Building 19, was demolished in 1995. During demolition, workers found restraint equipment bolted to the floor. The bolts had been worn smooth by friction, suggesting sustained struggle. Nobody wanted to speculate on how long someone would have to pull against restraints to wear down iron bolts, so nobody did. Fact number 16. The last asylum to use hydrotherapy. Fergus Falls State Hospital, Minnesota. The hydrotherapy unit operated from 1895 until 1985, 90 years of continuous baths. Patients were placed in porcelain tubs filled with water heated to 92 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit, wrapped in canvas sheets to prevent escape, and left submerged for 8 to 48 hours. The theory: warm water calms agitated patients. The reality: prolonged immersion causes skin maceration, hypothermia despite warm water, and occasionally drowning if the patient slipped under while attendants weren't watching. The canvas wraps were called mummy sheets. 12-ounce canvas, 6 feet by 3 feet, soaked in water, and wound tight around the body with only the head exposed. Patients described the sensation as being buried alive in wet concrete. Fergus Falls had 16 hydrotherapy tubs in Building 4. Each tub had a wooden cover with a neck hole, like a stockade. The cover prevented patients from sitting up. Attendants would check every 2 hours, sometimes every 4 hours if they were understaffed, which was most of the time. Between 1,920 and 1,940, Fergus Falls recorded 7 unexplained deaths in the hydrotherapy wing. The cause was listed as cardiac arrest in 5 cases and drowning in 2. No investigations were conducted. Hydrotherapy was considered progressive treatment in 1920. The hospital closed in 2005. The hydrotherapy equipment was auctioned off in 2007. One of the porcelain tubs sold for $400 to a salvage company. They planned to convert it into a decorative planter. Fact number 17. The death of Margaret Schilling, Athens Lunatic Asylum, Ohio, December 1st, 1978. Margaret Schilling, 53 years old, patient for 5 years, diagnosis: dementia. She disappeared during a shift change. Standard procedure required attendants to count patients at the beginning and end of each shift. The outgoing shift counted 319 patients. The incoming shift counted 319 patients. Nobody noticed Margaret was missing until her family called 3 days later asking to visit her. Search teams checked the grounds, the tunnels, the surrounding woods. 42 days later, on January 12th, 1979, a maintenance worker found her body on the top floor of Ward N20, an unused wing scheduled for demolition. She'd locked herself in a room, accidentally or intentionally. The door had a one-way latch. Once closed, it couldn't be opened from inside. She'd removed all her clothing and folded it neatly in a corner. Then she lay down near the window. The winter sun through the window had partially mummified her body. When they removed her, the outline of her body remained on the concrete floor. Skin oils, sweat, and decomposition fluids had stained the concrete. The hospital tried scrubbing the stain. It wouldn't come out. They tried chemical cleaners. The stain remained. They tried resurfacing the floor. The outline reappeared within weeks, bleeding through the new concrete like a photograph developing in reverse. Athens closed in 1993. The building is now part of Ohio University. Ward N20 is used for storage. The stain is still there. Students call it the corpse stain. Science says it's a permanent chemical reaction. Campus legend says Margaret never left. Fact number 18. Naked in ice baths. Byberry Mental Hospital, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1906 to 1990. For 84 years, Byberry was a warehouse for Philadelphia's unwanted. Peak population: 7,000 patients in a facility designed for 3,000. In 1946, a conscientious objector named Charles Lord, assigned to Byberry as alternative service during World War II, smuggled a camera inside. The photographs he took were published in Life magazine on May 6, 1946. The images showed naked patients lying in their own waste on concrete floors. Patients restrained in hydrotherapy tubs filled with ice water. Patients huddled together in unheated wards in winter. One photograph showed a patient who'd been in continuous restraints for so long his wrists had deep scars worn into the bone. Public outrage followed. Pennsylvania Governor Edward Martin promised immediate reforms. Inspectors visited. Conditions improved temporarily. By 1948, they'd deteriorated again. The ice bath protocol was particularly cruel. Water temperature, 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Duration, 20 minutes to 2 hours. Intended to shock catatonic patients back to awareness. Actual result, hypothermia, shock, and in at least 12 documented cases between 1,930 and 1,960, death. The hospital's defense, these were therapeutic procedures approved by the American Psychiatric Association, which was technically true. The APA didn't officially condemn hydrotherapy until 1985. Byberry closed in 1990. It was demolished in 2006. During demolition, workers found restraint equipment still bolted to walls in the basement. Some of the leather straps still had bloodstains. Fact number 19. The lobotomy assembly line, Athens State Hospital, Ohio. Between 1,947 and 1,960, over 1,000 lobotomies were performed. That's roughly 77 per year, more than one every 5 days. Dr. Robert Grimm ran the surgical program. He'd studied under Walter Freeman, the psychiatrist who popularized the transorbital lobotomy. The procedure took 10 minutes. An ice pick-like instrument called an orbitoclast was inserted above the eyeball, tapped through the orbital bone with a mallet, then swept side to side to sever the frontal lobe's connections. The patient was conscious, restrained, and often screaming. Freeman's method required no anesthesia, no sterile operating theater, just the orbitoclast and someone to hold the patient down. Athens performed these procedures in a converted storage room. Medical students observed from folding chairs arranged in rows. The success rate, according to hospital records, 63% of patients showed behavioral improvement, meaning they became quieter, more compliant, less trouble for staff. Independent follow-up studies in the 1,970 seconds found that only 12% showed genuine improvement in quality of life. 17% died or were left in vegetative states. One patient, whose name is redacted in the files, received a transorbital lobotomy in 1953 for chronic agitation. After the procedure, he could no longer speak, feed himself, or recognize his own family. He lived another 34 years in the hospital, completely dependent on staff care. His family never knew what happened. They were told the surgery was a minor therapeutic procedure. Fact number 20. Segregated lobotomy wards. Central State Hospital, Milledgeville, Georgia. Opened 1,842. By 1960, it was the largest psychiatric hospital in the world, surpassing Pilgrim. Peak population, 12,000 patients. Central State was segregated until 1965. Black patients lived in separate buildings, received less funding per capita, and had higher mortality rates. They also received lobotomies at disproportionate rates. Between 1,946 and 1,960, hospital records show 985 lobotomies performed. Of those, 627 were on Black patients, who comprised only 60% of the hospital's population. The math doesn't add up unless Black patients were being lobotomized at a rate 25% higher than white patients. The justification in medical notes frequently cited uncooperative behavior and resistance to treatment. Translated, Black patients who objected to conditions, who demanded better care, who questioned authority, were lobotomized into compliance. One patient file from 1,954 reads, "Patient became argumentative when denied visiting privileges. Refused to accept correction from staff. Recommended for psychosurgical intervention to reduce hostility." He was 23 years old. He spent the next 41 years at Central State, unable to care for himself. The hospital cemetery contains over 25,000 graves. Most are marked with numbers stamped on concrete blocks. The grave numbers correspond to patient ID numbers, but the master ledger connecting numbers to names was lost during a fire in 1979. Central State downsized dramatically in the 1,970 seconds. A small facility still operates. The old cemetery is overgrown. Volunteers occasionally attempt to map which numbers belong to which names. They're finding it harder than expected. The numbers don't always match the records that survived. Fact number 21. Walter Freeman's Traveling Show. Metropolitan State Hospital, Waltham, Massachusetts. Walter Freeman visited 23 times between 1946 and 1967. He called them teaching demonstrations. Others called them performances. Freeman would arrive in his personal vehicle, which he called his lobotomobile, a converted van equipped with examination lights and restraint equipment. He'd set up in whatever room the hospital provided, usually an auditorium or large conference room. Then he'd perform transorbital lobotomies, sometimes as many as 25 inches a single day, while doctors and medical students watched. He'd narrate the procedure: insert above the eye, through the orbital bone, sweep left, sweep right, withdraw. Next patient. Freeman personally performed 3,439 lobotomies between 1,936 and 1,967. He kept meticulous records: patient names, ages, diagnoses, outcomes. He photographed many of them before and after, always with the same pose, staring directly at the camera. At Metropolitan State, Freeman lobotomized a woman in 1952 for postpartum depression. She'd given birth 6 weeks earlier and was crying frequently. Her husband committed her. Freeman operated. She became docile, quiet, and unable to recognize her infant son. Her family was told the procedure was a success. Freeman's medical license was revoked in 1967 after a patient died during her third lobotomy. He'd performed multiple lobotomies on the same patient when the first one didn't take. The woman bled out from a nicked artery. She was 56 years old. Freeman died in 1972. He never expressed regret. His patient photographs are archived at George Washington University. They're not available to the public. Fact number 22. The typhoid outbreak and Thorazine trials. Manteno State Hospital, Illinois. August 1939. A typhoid fever outbreak killed 47 patients in 2 weeks. The source was traced to contaminated well water. The hospital had been using an unapproved well after the primary water system failed. Inspectors found that hospital staff knew the well was contaminated, but continued using it because connecting to the municipal water system would cost $18,000, roughly $400,000 today. The hospital administrator deemed it too expensive. 15 years later, in 1954, Manteno became one of the first institutions to test Thorazine, chlorpromazine, the first antipsychotic medication. The FDA had approved it in March 1954. By June, Manteno was administering it to over 300 patients. Dosage protocols didn't exist yet. Some patients received 75 milligrams daily. Others received 2,000 milligrams daily, over 25 times the standard dose. Doctors were experimenting, trying to find the therapeutic range. Side effects appeared immediately: muscle rigidity, tremors, drooling, shuffling gait. The condition was called Thorazine shuffle. It looked like Parkinson's disease. It was actually tardive dyskinesia, permanent neurological damage caused by antipsychotic medication. By 1960, Thorazine had reduced the need for lobotomies and restraints. It also created a new population: chemically lobotomized patients who could walk and talk, but couldn't think clearly, couldn't control their movements, and couldn't function outside institutional care. Manteno closed in 1985. The buildings were demolished in 2012. During demolition, workers found thousands of patient records in the basement, water damaged and illegible. The typhoid outbreak records were intact. The Thorazine trial records were missing pages. Just random gaps, as if someone had removed specific sections before the water damage occurred. Fact number 23. The hepatitis experiments on children. Willowbrook State School, Staten Island, New York. Opened 1,947 for children with intellectual disabilities. Capacity: 4,000. By 1965, over 6,200 children were crammed into overcrowded wards. Hepatitis was endemic. Nearly 90% of residents contracted hepatitis within 6 months of admission. Instead of improving sanitation, Dr. Saul Krugman decided to study the disease. Between 1,956 and 1,970, newly admitted children were deliberately infected with hepatitis. Parents were told their children would receive vaccinations. They were actually being given live hepatitis virus, extracted from the feces of infected residents. The justification: children would get hepatitis anyway. By controlling the infection, Researchers could study the disease progression and develop a vaccine. The ends justified the means. Parents weren't told their children were being used in experiments. They were told Willowbrook had a special hepatitis unit with better care. Many parents were desperate. Willowbrook had a years-long waiting list. Agreeing to the hepatitis unit meant immediate admission. Approximately 700 children were intentionally infected over 14 years. The research led to the development of the hepatitis B vaccine in 1981. Lives were saved, but the children who served as test subjects, many of whom suffered permanent liver damage, received no compensation. Dr. Krugman defended the research until his death in 1995. He argued that informed consent wasn't necessary because the children were going to get hepatitis regardless. The Willowbrook experiments are now taught in medical ethics courses as an example of what not to do. Fact number 24. Suffer the little children. Pennhurst State School, Spring City, Pennsylvania. Opened 1908. By 1960, it housed 3,500 residents, mostly children, in a facility built for 500. Conditions were medieval. Children were kept in locked wards, naked, sleeping on concrete floors. Minimal food, no education, no stimulation. Some were restrained to beds for years. In 1968, reporter Bill Baldini filmed an exposé called Suffer the Little Children that aired on Philadelphia's WCAU-TV. The footage showed children with untreated injuries, lying in their own waste, rocking back and forth endlessly. Self-harm was common. Staff shortages meant one attendant per 60 children. Public outrage followed. Lawsuits were filed. In 1977, Halderman v. Pennhurst reached federal court. The judge ruled that Pennhurst violated residents' constitutional rights and ordered the facility closed. The closure took 10 years. Pennhurst finally shut down in 1987. During the final evacuation, workers found residents who'd been forgotten in locked wards. One man, 47 years old, had lived at Pennhurst since age 4. He'd never left the building. He didn't know what cars were. The facility is now abandoned. It's considered one of the most haunted locations in America. Paranormal investigators report voices, shadows, the sound of children crying. Skeptics note that the wind through broken windows creates sounds that resemble human voices. The building's acoustics amplify echoes. Pareidolia causes people to see shapes and shadows. But everyone who visits reports the same thing, an overwhelming sense of sadness. That's harder to explain away. Fact number 25. Geraldo Rivera's exposé. Willowbrook State School, January 6, 1972. Geraldo Rivera, then a local reporter for WABC-TV, entered Willowbrook with a camera crew. Dr. Michael Wilkins, a Willowbrook physician horrified by conditions, had given Rivera a key to the back wards. Rivera filmed for 60 minutes. Only 6 minutes aired. The footage showed children lying naked on floors, covered in feces. Children tied to cribs. Children with untreated wounds, infections, and bedsores. One child, barely visible through the dim lighting, had chewed his own fingers to the bone. The segment won a Peabody Award. Public outrage forced the state to act. New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller promised immediate reforms. Inspections were conducted. Funding was increased. By 1975, conditions had improved marginally. Willowbrook still housed 5,400 residents. It closed in 1987. Rivera revisited Willowbrook in 1987 for a follow-up report. Many of the children he'd filmed in 1972 were still there, now adults in their 30s and 40s. Some had never left the institution. Some didn't know their own names. One man Rivera interviewed had been at Willowbrook for 39 years. He'd entered at age 7. He'd never attended school, never held a job, never lived anywhere else. Rivera asked him what he wanted to do now that the facility was closing. The man didn't understand the question. Fact number 26. The Minimum Standards Lawsuit. Partlow State School, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. October 23, 1970. Ricky Wyatt, a patient at Bryce Hospital next door, filed a lawsuit against the Alabama mental health system. The case, Wyatt v. Stickney, argued that patients had a constitutional right to treatment, not just custodial care. Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr. ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. He established minimum standards for psychiatric facilities: one shower per week, one toilet per 8 patients, minimum square footage per patient, staff-to-patient ratios, and access to outdoor recreation. These weren't luxuries. These were baseline human dignity standards, and Alabama institutions weren't meeting them. At Partlow, patients shared one toilet per 30 residents. Showers occurred once every 2 weeks, sometimes less. Patients slept on floors because there weren't enough beds. The food budget was $0.50 per patient per day, roughly $3.75 today. The ruling forced Alabama to either improve conditions or close facilities. The state chose closure. Partlow downsized from 2,400 residents in 1971 to 300 by 1999. It closed completely in 2012. Where did the 2,100 displaced residents go? Some moved to group homes. Some were released to family members. Some were transferred to other institutions. And some simply disappeared from records during the transition. A 2015 audit found 83 former Partlow residents whose discharge records listed transferred to family care, but whose families had no record of ever receiving them. The state explained it as a filing error. The families are still looking. Fact number 27. America's Auschwitz. Forest Haven, Laurel, Maryland, opened 1925 as a model facility for children with intellectual disabilities. By 1970, it housed 1,200 residents in a facility designed for 250. In 1991, the Washington Post published an exposé calling Forest Haven America's Auschwitz. Reporter Ruben Castaneda documented residents living in filth, suffering from untreated injuries, dying from preventable diseases. Between 1925 and 1991, at least 389 residents died at Forest Haven. The causes ranged from pneumonia to malnutrition to unknown. One child drowned in a bathtub while attendants were on break. Another choked on food because there was no one to supervise meals. The facility's cemetery contains unmarked graves. Many. Nobody knows exactly how many because the cemetery records are incomplete. A 2013 investigation found burial plots that don't appear in any official documentation. Forest Haven closed in October 1991. The buildings were abandoned. Urban explorers documented decaying patient records, medical equipment, and children's toys scattered across the floors. In 2017, human remains were found on the property. Dental records identified them as belonging to a former Forest Haven resident who'd been reported as transferred to family care in 1982. Nobody in his family had ever been contacted. Fact number 28. The first president's ghost. Lincoln's ghost. The White House. Let's be clear. This isn't an asylum, but the pattern's the same. Buildings where suffering occurred don't let go easily. Abraham Lincoln died April 15th, 1865. His ghost was first reported in 1911. Staff claimed to see him standing at windows in the Oval Office, staring toward the Potomac. First Lady Grace Coolidge saw him in the 1920 seconds. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands claimed she saw him in 1942 and fainted. Eleanor Roosevelt never saw Lincoln, but she felt his presence in the Lincoln bedroom, which was actually his office during his presidency. Winston Churchill, visiting during World War II, claimed he saw Lincoln standing by the fireplace. Churchill was stepping out of a bath, naked and holding a cigar. He said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." The figure supposedly smiled and vanished. Skeptics note that the White House is old, drafty, and full of strange sounds. The human brain constructs narratives from incomplete sensory data. People see what they expect to see, but staff still report footsteps in empty hallways, cold spots in specific rooms, and a persistent feeling of being watched. The White House has no exorcism records, but they do have a protocol for unexplained phenomena. It's filed under building maintenance concerns. Make of that what you will. Fact number 29. Danvers and the luxury condos. Danvers State Hospital, Massachusetts. Opened 1878. Classic Kirkbride design. 1.5 million square feet at peak. Nicknamed the Castle on the Hill for its Gothic architecture. It closed in 1992. Developers purchased it in 2005 for $6.9 million. Plans: demolish most of the complex, preserve the facade, build luxury apartments, Residents moved in starting in 2008. Condos sold for $300,000 to $900,000. Marketing materials emphasized the historic character, while carefully avoiding words like asylum or psychiatric hospital. Then, the reports started. Residents heard voices in walls, doors opened and closed by themselves. Elevators stopped on floors that don't exist in the new building but did exist in the old hospital. Between 2008 and 2012, Danvers police responded to 37 calls from Avalon Danvers apartments for suspicious sounds and intruders. No intruders were ever found. One resident told a reporter in 2010 that she'd wake at 3 a.m. to the sound of someone screaming. She'd check the hallway. Nothing. Her neighbors never heard anything. A former Danvers state nurse, interviewed in 2009, noted that 3 a.m. was medication time on the locked wards. Patients would scream when forced to take medications. The developer declined to comment on the reports. Apartments continue to sell. The screaming continues to be reported. The question isn't whether ghosts are real. The question is whether some buildings remember what happened inside them. Fact number 30. Hudson River and the Kirkbride they saved. Hudson River State Hospital, Poughkeepsie, New York. Opened 1871. Designed by Frederick Clark Withers. Gothic Revival architecture so beautiful it's on the National Register of Historic Places. The hospital closed in 2003. Preservationists fought to save the main Kirkbride building. They succeeded. Most of the campus was demolished, but the central structure remains. As of 2025, the building is still empty. Restoration efforts stall repeatedly due to funding issues, environmental concerns, and the discovery of asbestos in 80% of the structure. Tours are occasionally offered. Guides report that certain rooms have inexplicable temperature drops. In summer, with outside temperatures at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, the second floor ward measures 62 degrees Fahrenheit. No air conditioning exists in the building. Photographers who've been granted access report camera malfunctions in specific locations. Digital cameras display error messages. Film cameras jam. One photographer's entire memory card corrupted when he entered the hydrotherapy room. Environmental engineers blame magnetic fields from old electrical systems. Paranormal investigators blame the 350-plus documented deaths that occurred in the building between 1871 and 2003. The Kirkbride building still stands, waiting for restoration funding that may never come. Meanwhile, the ivy grows thicker, the windows break one by one, and the temperature in the second floor ward remains precisely 62 degrees Fahrenheit, summer and winter, without explanation. Fact number 31. Norwich and the Forest Reclaiming. Norwich State Hospital, Connecticut. Opened 1904, closed 1996. Most buildings demolished 2009, but not all. 2 buildings remain, slowly being consumed by forest. Trees grow through windows, vines cover walls. 40 years of weather and neglect have turned the structures into something between architecture and landscape. Urban explorers document the decay. Inside, patient records still litter the floors. Medical equipment rusts in corners. In one room, someone found a patient restraint chair bolted to the floor, surrounded by scratch marks in the linoleum. The scratch marks formed words, help repeated approximately 50 times. Could be a hoax. Urban explorers are known for staging scenes, but the linoleum was original to the 1904 construction, and the scratches had worn down to the concrete beneath, suggesting decades of consistent abrasion. Someone spent a very long time in that chair. Norwich's patient cemetery contains 996 graves. Only 200 have names. The rest are numbered. The state of Connecticut lost the ledger that connected numbers to identities sometime in the 1980 seconds. Families looking for relatives hit dead ends. Literally. The forest continues its work. In another decade, the buildings will be indistinguishable from the landscape. The graves will be unmarked hills under moss. Perhaps that's better. Perhaps some places should be forgotten. Fact number 32. Greystone's 673,000 square feet. Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital, New Jersey. Opened 1876. The main building measured 673,000 square feet with a contiguous foundation, the largest continuous foundation in the world at the time. Kirkbride design. Gothic revival. Built to be beautiful, to inspire hope. It became a warehouse. Peak population, 7,700 patients in 1954. The hospital closed in 2008. The Kirkbride building sat empty for 7 years. Preservationists fought for restoration. The state cited costs, $100 million minimum, plus years of asbestos removal. On April 9th, 2015, demolition began. Historic preservation groups protested. They chained themselves to the fence. Police removed them. The wrecking balls continued. During demolition, workers found rooms that didn't appear on any blueprints, hidden spaces between floors. One contained restraint equipment. Another contained children's shoes, hundreds of pairs, small sizes, lined up against a wall. Nobody knows why they were there. The children's ward was on the opposite side of the building. Greystone Cemetery holds approximately 1,000 bodies. The graves were unmarked. In 2013, volunteers installed plaques with patient names recovered from hospital records. Not all names could be recovered. 300 graves remain unidentified. The Kirkbride building is gone now. The site is empty. Developers plan luxury apartments, like always. But first, they have to excavate the foundation. 673,000 square feet of concrete. Removal costs exceed $12 million, so the foundation remains, buried under soil and grass. Still the largest contiguous foundation in New Jersey. Still there, under everything new. Fact number 33. Buffalo State and H. Richardson's design. Buffalo State Hospital, New York. Designed by H. Richardson, one of America's most celebrated architects. Opened 1880. Romanesque revival style. Absolutely stunning. Also absolutely cursed, if you believe the stories. The hospital operated until 1974. Parts remained active until 1995. Most of the complex has been abandoned for 30 years. The abandoned wings contain 1,200 tons of asbestos. Removal cost, $40 million. The state doesn't have the funding, so the buildings sit, slowly collapsing. Tours are occasionally offered of the restored sections. Guides mention unusual occurrences, doors that lock from the inside, footsteps in empty hallways, the smell of ether in rooms where surgeries were performed 100 years ago. One tour guide reported that her group of 12 entered a hallway. When they exited, they counted 13 people. The 13th person, a woman in outdated clothing, walked to the end of the hall and disappeared through a wall. Skeptics note that old buildings create optical illusions, mirrors, reflective surfaces, shadows. The guide probably miscounted, but she quit the next day. Richardson died in 1886, 6 years after the hospital opened. He never saw what his beautiful building became. Maybe that's mercy. Fact number 34. Trans-Allegheny becomes a haunted attraction. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Weston, West Virginia. Opened 1864. Kirkbride design. Designed for 250 patients. Held 2,400 by the 1,950 seconds. The hospital closed in 1994. In 2007, it was purchased by a private owner who turned it into a tourist destination. Historical tours by day, ghost hunts by night. Trans-Allegheny is now one of America's most popular paranormal investigation sites. Thousands visit annually, paying $25 to $100 for tours. Common reports: voices, shadow figures, objects moving, overwhelming feelings of dread. One popular story involves Lily, a ghost child who supposedly plays with visitors in the children's ward. Paranormal investigators bring equipment: EMF detectors, infrared cameras, audio recorders. They capture strange phenomena, unexplained temperature drops, electronic voice phenomena, shadows on camera. Skeptics explain it as suggestion, confirmation bias, and environmental factors. Old buildings make sounds, temperatures fluctuate, brains fill in gaps, but the reports are consistent across thousands of visitors who don't know each other and don't know the stories beforehand. Trans-Allegheny made $1.2 million in tour revenue in 2022. The building is being slowly restored with that funding. Suffering has become profitable. Is that better or worse than abandonment? The asylum doesn't answer. It just takes the money and opens its doors to anyone willing to pay. Fact number 35. The records destroyed in 73. 44 institutions received CIA funding under MKULTRA, the agency's mind control research program. 12 of those institutions destroyed their records in 1973, just before the Church Committee investigation. We know the program existed. We know asylums participated. We know patients were dosed with LSD, mescaline, and experimental compounds without consent. What we don't know: which asylums, which patients, what happened to them. The CIA destroyed records on orders from Director Richard Helms. What survived was accidental, misfiled documents recovered later. They reference locations by code names: Site 17, Facility K, Project Bluebird Location 7. Researchers have attempted to decode the locations. Some match known hospitals: Street Elizabeths, Ionia State Hospital, Vacaville Medical Facility. Others remain unknown. 12 facilities destroyed records. Were they covering up participation? Or was it standard protocol when CIA contracts ended? Survivors have come forward. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was an MKULTRA subject at Harvard in 1959. Author Ken Kesey participated voluntarily at Menlo Park VA Hospital in 1960. How many participated involuntarily? How many were asylum patients with no ability to consent, no families to object, no legal recourse? The records are gone. The participants are mostly dead. The CIA settled a few lawsuits and apologized vaguely. The truth dissolved in 1973, like paper and fire. All that remains are fragments and guesses. And somewhere, 12 institutions know exactly what they did. They just won't say. Fact number 36. The assembly line surgery. Grafton State Hospital, Massachusetts. 1949. Dr. Eugene Ziskind visits from the University of Southern California. He studied Walter Freeman's methods. He proposes efficiency improvements. The hospital sets up what internal memos call batch processing. 20 patients scheduled for transorbital lobotomy on the same day. 1 surgical suite, 1 ice pick, 1 mallet. Procedure time per patient: 8 to 12 minutes, including patient rotation. Recovery room holds all 20 patients simultaneously. Total time from first incision to last patient off the table: 4 hours and 17 minutes, according to the surgical log dated March 3, 1949. Of the 20 patients lobotomized that day, hospital records show 7 were discharged within 6 months as improved, meaning compliant and manageable. 4 died within 1 year from post-surgical complications. 9 remained institutionalized for life with severe cognitive impairment. The efficiency model was deemed successful. Grafton performed batch lobotomies 6 more times between 1949 and 1952. A total of 134 patients. The surgical logs are preserved in the Massachusetts State Archives. They read like factory production reports, patient names replaced with numbers, outcomes measured in time saved, not lives improved. One notation from the March 3 log: patient 14 required additional sedation during procedure due to excessive movement. Procedure completed successfully. Recovery unremarkable. Patient 14 was a 19-year-old girl diagnosed with adolescent rebellion. She'd run away from home twice. She spent the next 48 years at Grafton, unable to dress herself. Her name was Sarah. The logs just called her 14. Fact number 37. The racial disparity study nobody published. Crownsville State Hospital, Maryland, 1948 to 1963. The hospital was segregated, serving only black patients until integration in 1963. During those 15 years, 441 lobotomies were performed. Maryland's total black population, in 1,950, approximately 385,000. Maryland's total white population, approximately 1,823,000. Yet Crownsville performed nearly as many lobotomies as all of Maryland's white-serving institutions combined. A 1,965 Johns Hopkins study examined the disparity. The researcher, Dr. Theodore Lids, found that black patients at Crownsville were lobotomized for behaviors that in white institutions warranted observation or medication. Diagnosis leading to lobotomy at Crownsville: aggressive behavior, 68% of cases; noncompliance with treatment, 19%; sexual deviancy, 7%; other 6%. Diagnosis leading to lobotomy at white institutions: severe schizophrenia, 51%; suicidal ideation, 23%, treatment-resistant depression, 18%, other, 8%. Translation: white patients were lobotomized for psychiatric conditions. Black patients were lobotomized for being difficult. Dr. Lids submitted his findings to the American Journal of Psychiatry in 1966. The journal rejected the paper. Editorial notes, preserved in Lids's archives at Yale, cite insufficient sample size and controversial implications. The study was never published. Dr. Lids died in 1993. His research was donated to Yale University, where it remained in boxes until 2008. Crownsville closed in 2004. Its cemetery contains 1,700 graves, most unmarked. Archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar in 2012 found an additional 800 to 1,000 unmarked burial sites beyond the cemetery's documented boundaries. The state of Maryland allocated $3.2 million in 2022 for grave markers. Installation is ongoing. Fact number 38. The children's lobotomies. Stockton State Hospital, California. Between 1,947 and 1,954, at least 37 children under age 12 received transorbital lobotomies. The youngest was 6 years old. Parental consent was required for minors. Hospital records show consent forms signed, but interviews with surviving family members in the 1,980 seconds revealed that parents were told the procedure was a minor corrective surgery to reduce hyperactivity. One mother, interviewed in 1983, said, "They told me Bobby was too energetic for the classroom. They said this would calm him down so he could learn better. I thought they were removing his tonsils." Bobby received a transorbital lobotomy in 1951 at age 7. He never learned to read. He lived at Stockton until 1978, when deinstitutionalization moved him to a group home. He died in 1994, age 50. His mother didn't learn what had actually been done to him until 1982, when California released partial medical records as part of a class action lawsuit. Stockton's children's lobotomy program was discontinued in 1954, not because of ethical concerns, but because Thorazine became available and was cheaper than surgery. The hospital's justification, in a 1955 internal memo, chemical management provides equivalent behavioral modification at reduced cost and eliminates surgical complications. Translation: pills were cheaper than ice picks. The 37 children who received lobotomies at Stockton are documented. The outcomes are documented. No apologies were ever issued. The consent forms are still on file, signed by parents who thought they were helping their children focus in school. Fact number 39. The Doctor Who kept photographs. Dr. Walter Freeman photographed his lobotomy patients obsessively, before and after. Same pose, seated, facing the camera, expressionless. His archive contains 2,842 photographs spanning 1936 to 1967. The collection is housed at George Washington University's Special Collections. Researchers require written permission to access it. The photographs are disturbing not because they're graphic, but because they're clinical. Freeman treated documentation like specimen collection. Patient 427, Patient 891, Patient 1,203. One series shows a woman photographed in 1945 before lobotomy. She's animated, smiling slightly, eyes engaged. The photograph taken 3 weeks post-lobotomy shows the same woman. Same pose, different person, eyes vacant, face slack. The smile is gone, but so is everything behind it. Freeman captioned the second photo, "Marked improvement in affect regulation." He published some photographs in medical journals. Most remained private. He showed them at conferences, lectures, medical school presentations. The patients were never asked for permission. Most were never told the photographs existed. Freeman died in 1972. His family donated his papers to George Washington University in 1985. The photographs were sealed until 2003 due to privacy concerns. When the archive opened, researchers found Freeman's personal notes attached to many photographs. Comments like "excellent result," or "disappointing outcome," or "patient non-compliant post-procedure." One note, attached to the photograph of a 23-year-old woman, lobotomized in 1952, "Patient continues to resist reintegration, considering second procedure." The woman received a second lobotomy 3 months later. She died 6 weeks after that from a brain hemorrhage. Freeman noted, Regrettable complication. Technique requires refinement. Fact number 40. The lobotomy performed on a 4-year-old. 1948. Location withheld because the family is still living and requested anonymity when the case was documented in 2001. A 4-year-old boy. Diagnosis: childhood schizophrenia, which in 1948 could mean anything from actual psychosis to autism to simply being an unmanageable child. His parents were told he'd never improve without intervention. Walter Freeman performed the transorbital lobotomy personally. The boy survived. He lived another 61 years, dying in 2009. He never learned to speak beyond single words. He never lived independently. He required full-time care for 61 years. A journalist located his sister in 2001. She was 68 years old, had been caring for her brother since their parents died in 1983. She said, "He was a normal little boy, energetic, loud. He cried a lot. That's not a disease. That's being 4 years old." Asked why their parents consented to the surgery, she said, "They were told he'd become violent when he got older, that he'd hurt people, that this would prevent that." The boy never showed violence in his 61 years. He couldn't. He barely had enough cognitive function to feed himself. The journalist asked the sister if she was angry. She said, "I'm tired. I've been tired for 68 years." Freeman's records list the case as pediatric intervention, outcome, behavioral stabilization achieved. The sister's description: they destroyed him when he was 4 years old. Both statements are factually accurate. Fact number 41. The Thorazine trials at Modesto State Hospital, California. Spring 1954. Chlorpromazine had been FDA approved for 2 months. Pharmaceutical company Smith, Kline, and French needed data. Hospitals needed solutions for overcrowding. Modesto volunteered 500 patients for the clinical trial. Ages ranged from 19 to 76. Diagnoses included schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, and chronic agitation, which wasn't actually a diagnosis. Dosages varied wildly because protocols didn't exist yet. Some patients received 100 milligrams daily. Others received 1,800 milligrams daily. Doctors were guessing, adjusting based on observation. Within 3 months, 87% of patients showed reduced agitation. This meant they were quieter, more docile, easier to manage. It didn't mean they were better. Side effects appeared immediately: tardive dyskinesia, involuntary muscle movements, tremors, facial tics, akathisia, a feeling of internal restlessness. So severe patients described it as wanting to crawl out of my own skin. One patient, a 34-year-old woman diagnosed with postpartum depression, developed such severe tremors she couldn't hold a fork. Hospital notes from June 1954 read, "Patient shows marked improvement in emotional volatility. Physical side effects noted but do not outweigh behavioral benefits." The woman spent 23 more years at Modesto. She never recovered motor control. She was released in 1977 to a nursing home, where she died in 1981 from aspiration pneumonia, choking on food she couldn't coordinate swallowing. The Modesto trial data was published in the American Journal of Psychiatry in 1955. It became foundational evidence for widespread Thorazine adoption. The side effects were mentioned in a footnote. Fact number 42. The Thorazine shuffle. By 1960, Thorazine was standard treatment in American asylums. It reduced the need for restraints, lobotomies, and hydrotherapy. It also created a new phenomenon, the Thorazine shuffle. Tardive dyskinesia, caused by antipsychotic medication, produces a characteristic gait: short, shuffling steps, stiff posture, arms held rigid at sides, facial muscles frozen, drooling. The shuffle became so common in institutional settings that staff stopped noticing it. It was just how patients walked. Ionia State Hospital, Michigan. A 1963 training film for new attendants shows a hallway of patients, all walking with the shuffle. The narrator says, "Notice the patient's calm demeanor and cooperative behavior. This is the result of proper medication management." The film doesn't mention that the patients can barely walk, that their muscles are locked, that they're not calm, they're chemically paralyzed. Tardive dyskinesia is often permanent. Even after stopping the medication, the neurological damage remains. Patients who took Thorazine in the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds shuffled for the rest of their lives. One former patient, interviewed in 1998, said, "I was 22 when they started me on Thorazine. I'm 67 now. I haven't taken it in 30 years. I still can't walk normal. I still can't control my face. They took my body and never gave it back." The pharmaceutical companies knew about tardive dyskinesia by 1957. Internal memos from Smith, Klein, and French, released during litigation in 1985, show executives discussing whether to include stronger warnings on packaging. They decided against it. Reason cited: may discourage physician prescribing behavior. The warnings weren't strengthened until 1973, after 20 years and millions of patients. Fact number 43. The Manteno typhoid cover-up. We covered Manteno earlier for Thorazine trials, but the typhoid outbreak deserves its own number because of what happened after. August 1939. 47 patients died in 2 weeks. State investigators traced the outbreak to contaminated well water. The hospital administrator, Dr. George Zeller, had known the well was unsafe, but continued using it. Zeller was not fired. He was not charged. He was reprimanded and transferred to another state facility, Peoria State Hospital, where he worked until retirement in 1950. The families of the 47 dead patients filed a lawsuit in 1940. The state of Illinois settled out of court for undisclosed amounts with a mandatory non-disclosure agreement. None of the families ever spoke publicly about the settlement. Court documents were sealed. They remained sealed until 2011, when Illinois passed a law opening records older than 75 years. The settlement amounts: $500 per death. Total payout: $23,500. In $1940, that's roughly $18,000 per death in today's money. The state valued each life at less than the cost of a used car. One family refused the settlement, the Kowalski family, whose 16-year-old daughter died on August 19, 1939. They demanded a public trial. The state threatened to have their surviving children removed by child services if they didn't accept the settlement and sign the NDA. They signed. That information is in the unsealed documents. The state's threat is documented in a memo from the Assistant Attorney General, dated September 12, 1939. Nobody was ever held accountable. Dr. Zeller died in 1956. His obituary called him a dedicated public servant. Fact number 44. The hepatitis vaccine they developed. The Willowbrook hepatitis experiments led to a breakthrough. Dr. Saul Krugman's research, conducted on those 700 intentionally infected children, identified different strains of hepatitis. His work distinguished hepatitis A from hepatitis B. It led directly to the development of the hepatitis B vaccine, approved in 1981. That vaccine has saved millions of lives worldwide. It's on the CDC's recommended childhood vaccination schedule. It's required for healthcare workers. It's one of the most important public health achievements of the 20th century. And it exists because 700 intellectually disabled children were infected with a disease without their consent or their parents' informed consent. This is the ethical paradox nobody wants to discuss. The research was unconscionable. The results were invaluable. Dr. Krugman defended his work until his death in 1995. He argued that the children would have contracted hepatitis anyway due to Willowbrook's overcrowding and poor sanitation. By controlling the infection, he could study it safely and develop treatments. His critics argue that the proper response to endemic hepatitis was improving sanitation, not experimenting on children. Both positions are logical. They cannot be reconciled. The vaccine exists. Millions of people are alive because of it. And 700 children with intellectual disabilities were used as test subjects. History contains this paradox. There's no resolving it. You just have to hold both truths at once and feel sick about it. Fact number 45. The Pennhurst Forgotten Wards. When Pennhurst finally closed in 1987, evacuation took 6 months. Staff worked through the complex systematically, transferring residents to group homes and other facilities. In November 1987, during the final sweep, workers found a locked ward that didn't appear on current facility maps. It had been closed since 1972, but never officially decommissioned. Inside, 14 hospital beds, still made, medical equipment, patient files, and a logbook. The logbook covered January 1968 to March 1970. 972. It documented 19 residents, all children under age 10. All were listed as severe cases requiring isolation. Cross-referencing with Penhurst's main records showed something strange. 12 of the 19 children were listed as transferred to family care between 1,969 and 1,971. But the logbook showed they remained in the locked ward until 1972. Daily entries documented their meals, medications, behavioral notes. Either the main records were wrong, or the logbook was wrong. Investigators tried contacting the families. 8 of the 12 families had no record of ever receiving their children. Where did those 8 children go? The investigation concluded in 1989. Official finding: records inconsistency due to administrative error during transition period. No evidence of wrongdoing. Unofficial finding from a Pennsylvania state investigator's memo that leaked in 2003. Someone falsified transfer records. We don't know why. We don't know where the children went. The people who would know are dead or unwilling to talk. The locked ward is still there. Penhurst is now a haunted attraction. The forgotten ward is off limits to tours. Fact number 46. Geraldo's footage they didn't air. Geraldo Rivera filmed 60 minutes at Willowbrook in 1972. 6 minutes aired. The rest was deemed too disturbing for broadcast. In 2005, Rivera donated his complete Willowbrook footage to the Library of Congress. Researchers can access it with written permission and valid academic justification. The unaired footage includes scenes of children tied to cribs for hours, children with open wounds, untreated, children screaming while staff ignore them, and one scene that Rivera later said haunted him for decades. A child, maybe 4 years old, naked, standing in a corner of a locked ward, rocking back and forth, hitting his head against the wall, over and over, blood on the wall, blood in his hair. An attendant walks past, doesn't stop, doesn't look. Rivera's crew asked why no one was helping the child. The attendant said, "He does this all day. If we stop him, he just starts again. Eventually, he'll tire himself out." The child hit his head against the wall 37 times before the crew stopped filming. They couldn't watch anymore. Rivera included this scene in the footage he sent to ABC. The network refused to air it. Too graphic. Too disturbing. The public wasn't ready. In his 2005 interview, when donating the footage, Rivera was asked if the public is ready now. He said, "I don't think people are ever ready to see what we did to those children, but they need to see it anyway. The footage is available. Few people have watched it. Those who have don't watch it twice." Fact number 47. The minimum standard of 1 shower per week. Wyatt v. Stickney established minimum standards in 1971. Among them, patients had the right to 1 shower per week. Think about that. In 1971, it required a federal court order to guarantee that human beings in state care would be bathed once every 7 days. Before the ruling, patients at Partlow State School in Alabama bathed once every 2 weeks, sometimes once a month. At Bryce Hospital, showers occurred as needed, which staff determined based on smell. One nurse, testifying during the trial, was asked how she determined when patients needed showers. She said, "When we could smell them from the nurse's station." The nurse's station was 40 feet from the dormitory. The ruling also mandated 1 toilet per 8 patients. Before the ruling, Partlow had 1 toilet per 30 residents. Lines formed in the morning. Patients would wait an hour or more. What happened if someone couldn't wait? They went in their clothes. Then they waited another week or 2 for a shower. These weren't outlier facilities. These were typical state institutions in 1971. Judge Johnson's ruling called the conditions barbaric and a violation of basic human dignity. The state of Alabama argued that funding limitations made improvements impossible. The judge responded, "Then close the facilities, but you will not continue to cage human beings like animals." Alabama began closing institutions. Most states followed. Deinstitutionalization accelerated. The ruling is considered a landmark in patients' rights, but it's also a monument to shame. It took a federal lawsuit to establish that people deserve to be clean. Fact number 48. The Forest Haven Unmarked Cemetery. Forest Haven Cemetery was discovered by accident in 2013. A contractor surveying the property for development walked into the woods behind the abandoned buildings. He found 389 grave markers, concrete slabs with numbers, no names. The numbers corresponded to patient ID numbers, but the master ledger connecting numbers to identities was lost during the facility closure in 1991. Ground-penetrating radar revealed additional burials. Many additional burials. Estimates range from 500 to 800 unmarked graves in total. Forest Haven operated from 1925 to 1991. Official records document 389 deaths. Even using the conservative estimate of 500 graves, that's 111 unaccounted bodies. Where did they come from? One theory: record keeping was poor, especially in the early decades. Deaths occurred but weren't properly documented. Another theory: residents died and families weren't notified. Or families were notified but couldn't afford burial elsewhere, so the facility buried them without updating records. A third theory: whispered but never officially investigated. Some of those graves aren't from Forest Haven at all. The facility is near Patuxent Research Refuge, where Cold War-era government research occurred. Some graves might predate the hospital. Nobody knows. The state of Maryland allocated funding in 2017 to identify the graves using DNA if possible. Progress has been slow. As of 2024, only 73 graves have been positively identified. The rest remain numbers in the ground. No names, no families, no one to mourn them. The forest is slowly reclaiming the cemetery. In another decade, it'll be indistinguishable from the woods. Fact number 49. The lobotomy they performed on Rosemary Kennedy. We should mention this one, even though it's well known. Rosemary Kennedy, sister of President John F. Kennedy, received a lobotomy in 1941 at age 23. Rosemary had intellectual disabilities and mood swings. Her father, Joseph Kennedy, feared she'd embarrass the family or become pregnant out of wedlock. He consulted Dr. Walter Freeman and Dr. James Watts. The procedure was transorbital lobotomy, performed at George Washington University Hospital. Rosemary was awake during the surgery. The doctors asked her to recite prayers and sing songs while they worked to monitor brain function. When she stopped responding coherently, they knew they'd gone deep enough. The surgery left Rosemary with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old. She could no longer walk or speak clearly. She required full-time care for the rest of her life. Joseph Kennedy never told his wife or other children what he'd done. He simply sent Rosemary to an institution in Wisconsin and told the family she was resting. The truth emerged in the 1,960 seconds. By then, Rosemary had been institutionalized for 20 years. She lived until 2005, dying at age 86. She spent 64 years in institutional care because her father decided she was an inconvenience. JFK later supported mental health reform legislation. Whether his sister's tragedy influenced that support is speculation, but the timing suggests a connection. Rosemary's lobotomy is documented. Joseph Kennedy's reasoning is not. He died in 1969 without ever publicly acknowledging what he'd done. The family donated millions to disability causes after his death, but Rosemary never got her life back. Fact number 50. The insulin coma deaths, they stopped counting. Insulin shock therapy was discontinued in most facilities by 1960, replaced by Thorazine and other antipsychotics, but some hospitals continued using it into the 1,970 seconds. Harlem Valley State Hospital, New York, used insulin coma therapy until 1973. Records show 1,247 patients received the treatment between 1,950 and 1,973. Mortality rate for the procedure was supposed to be 1 to 5%, but Harlem Valley's internal documents, released during a 1985 lawsuit, show a 9.2% mortality rate. That's 115 deaths from a treatment that was supposed to be therapeutic. The hospital's explanation: their patient population was sicker, more treatment resistant, thus higher risk. Independent medical reviewers disagreed. They found the deaths resulted from inadequate monitoring, improper dosing, and delayed glucose administration. Translation: patients were dying because staff wasn't paying attention. One case from 1968, a patient was placed in insulin coma at 9 a.m. Staff was supposed to administer glucose at 10 a.m. after 60 minutes. Due to understaffing, no one checked on her until 11:30 a.m. She'd been in coma for 2.5 hours. She survived but suffered permanent brain damage. She never regained the ability to speak. The attending physician noted in her file, Extended coma duration unfortunate but unavoidable given staffing constraints. Patient prognosis poor regardless. The lawsuit was settled out of court in 1986. Terms were sealed, the families received undisclosed payments and signed NDAs. Harlem Valley closed in 1994. The building still stands, abandoned. Urban explorers report finding medical files in the basement, water damaged but partially legible. Among them, insulin therapy logs with handwritten notes in the margins. Things like too long and mistake and couldn't find her. Fact number 51. The electroshock without anesthesia. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, can be effective for severe depression when properly administered with anesthesia and muscle relaxants. In the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds, it was often administered without either. Patients were strapped to tables, electrodes placed on temples, current applied. The resulting seizure was so violent it could fracture bones. Spinal compression fractures were common, shoulder dislocations, broken teeth from jaw clenching. Camarillo State Hospital, California. Between 1,952 and 1,968, ECT was administered to approximately 4,200 patients. Medical records show at least 340 documented fractures, dislocations, or other injuries directly resulting from the procedure. That's 8% injury rate, and those are just the documented cases. One patient, a 19-year-old woman diagnosed with hysteria, which in 1955 could mean anything, received ECT without anesthesia in March 1955. The seizure was so severe she fractured 3 vertebrae. Hospital notes. Patient experienced adverse skeletal response to treatment. Orthopedic consultation requested. She spent 6 months in a body cast. She received 14 more ECT treatments while in the cast to prevent regression of therapeutic gains. She was released in 1957, permanently disabled. She sued the hospital in 1960. The case was dismissed. Reason: she'd signed a consent form before treatment. The consent form didn't mention the possibility of fractures. When questioned, the hospital argued that all medical procedures carry inherent risks. Camarillo closed in 1997. The building was demolished in 2004. During demolition, workers found an old storage room filled with medical equipment. Among the items, 23 leather restraint sets, heavily worn, and a wooden mouthguard, split down the middle from pressure. Someone had bitten through a half-inch piece of hardwood. Fact number 52. The doctor who lost his license in 1967. Walter Freeman performed his final lobotomy on February 13th, 1967. The patient was a 62-year-old woman undergoing her 3rd lobotomy. Freeman believed in refinement through repetition. If one lobotomy didn't produce desired results, he'd perform another. During the procedure, Freeman nicked a blood vessel. The woman hemorrhaged. She died on the operating table. Freeman's medical license was revoked. He was 71 years old. He'd performed 3,439 lobotomies over 31 years. He spent his retirement traveling, visiting former patients. He documented their outcomes, photographed them, interviewed them. He was compiling data for a book he planned to write, The Lobotomy Story, A Medical and Social History. The book was never completed. Freeman died in 1972 from complications of colon cancer. His papers were donated to George Washington University in 1985. Among them, 47 notebooks containing follow-up interviews with lobotomized patients. The interviews are chilling. Freeman asked leading questions. Do you feel calmer now? Are you easier to live with? He recorded their answers without noting their obvious cognitive impairments. One interview, dated 1968, with a man lobotomized in 1944. Freeman: do you feel the surgery helped you? Patient: yes. Freeman: in what ways? Patient: I don't know. Freeman: but you feel better? Patient: I think so. Freeman noted. Patient reports subjective improvement and satisfaction with outcome. The patient was 58 years old. He'd lived with his sister since the lobotomy. He couldn't work, couldn't manage his own finances, couldn't live independently. But Freeman wrote, successful outcome. Patient integrated into family life. Freeman never expressed doubt about his work. In his final interviews before his death, he maintained that lobotomy was misunderstood, that his patients were helped, that history would vindicate him. History has not been kind to Walter Freeman. Fact number 53. The Community Mental Health Act they didn't fund. 1963. President John F. Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Act. The plan: close large institutions, build community mental health centers, provide outpatient care in local settings. The act authorized construction of 2,000 community mental health centers nationwide. Federal funding would cover initial construction. States would handle operating costs. By 1980, only 754 centers had been built, less than 40% of the goal. Why? The federal government provided construction money, but states couldn't afford ongoing operations. Mental health wasn't a priority in state budgets. When money got tight, mental health programs were cut first. Meanwhile, institutions closed. Between 1955 and 1980, the institutionalized population dropped from 558,239 to 154,000. Over 400,000 people released. The math didn't work. 400,000 people needed services. 754 centers existed to serve them, and those centers were underfunded, understaffed, and overwhelmed. Where did the 400,000 people go? Some went to nursing homes, some went to family care, some went to board and care homes, essentially unlicensed group houses with minimal oversight, and many went to the streets. A 1,984 study estimated that 30 to 40% of homeless Americans had serious mental illness. Not because deinstitutionalization was wrong in principle, but because it was implemented without infrastructure. The hospitals closed. The community centers were never built. The patients were released into nothing. Kennedy's vision was humane. The execution was catastrophic. Fact number 54. The nursing home transfers. When asylums closed, nursing homes became the new warehouses. Elderly psychiatric patients, many institutionalized for 40 or 50 years, were transferred to for-profit nursing facilities. The nursing homes were paid by Medicaid. Rates varied by state but averaged $80 to $120 per patient per day in 1980, roughly $300 to $450 today. The problem: nursing homes were designed for elderly people with physical ailments, not chronic psychiatric conditions. Staff had no psychiatric training. Facilities had no therapeutic programs. Psychiatric patients were medicated heavily, kept sedated, and basically warehoused until they died. A 1,982 investigation by the Boston Globe examined nursing home transfers in Massachusetts. Reporters found former state hospital patients, some in their 60 seconds and 70 seconds, who'd spent decades at institutions like Danvers, Worcester, and Northampton. One woman, 68 years old, had been institutionalized at age 19 for postpartum psychosis. She spent 49 years at Worcester State Hospital. When Worcester closed, she was transferred to a nursing home in 1981. The nursing home had 120 residents and 4 staff members on night shift. No psychiatric services, no therapy, no recreation. The woman sat in a wheelchair in the common room all day, every day, watching television. She didn't speak. Staff assumed she couldn't. A reporter asked her a question. She responded clearly, coherently. She said, "She died 3 months later. Cause of death: pneumonia." But the reporter who interviewed her wrote, "She died because she'd been forgotten for 50 years and nobody noticed she was still a person." Tens of thousands of patients experienced similar transfers. They survived deinstitutionalization only to spend their final years in facilities that were asylums in everything but name. Fact number 55. The board and care scandals. Board and care homes were supposed to be small, home-like environments for people with mental illness. Private homes, usually 6 to 12 residents, providing meals and supervision. In reality, many were unlicensed, unregulated, and dangerous. A 1,978 investigation in California found 400-plus board and care homes operating without licenses. Conditions ranged from neglectful to abusive. One home in Sacramento housed 11 former state hospital patients in a 3-bedroom house. Residents slept on mattresses on the floor. Meals consisted of canned food heated in a microwave. The operator collected $700 per month per resident from Social Security disability payments. That's $7,700 per month total, roughly $37,000 today. The operator's monthly expenses, $2,000 for rent and food. The remaining $5,700 was profit. Residents received no treatment, no therapy, no activities. They sat in the house all day. Some operators locked residents inside for their safety. The worst case, a board and care home in Contra Costa County. January 1980. Fire broke out at 3 a.m. The exits were locked from the outside. 5 residents died, trapped in their bedrooms. Investigation revealed the operator had been cited multiple times for safety violations, but never shut down. Residents had complained to social workers, who filed reports that were never acted upon. The operator was charged with involuntary manslaughter. He plea bargained to criminal negligence. Sentence: 3 years probation. California passed stricter licensing laws in 1982. Enforcement remained inconsistent. By 1990, an estimated 30% of boarding care homes still operated without proper licenses. The patients who survived asylums died in fires, from neglect, from abuse, in places that were supposed to be better. Fact number 56. The transinstitutionalization to prison. Deinstitutionalization didn't end institutionalization. It just moved it from hospitals to jails. In 1970, approximately 3% of jail inmates had serious mental illness. By 1990, that number was 15%. By 2020, 20 to 25%. Today, the 3 largest mental health facilities in America are jails: Los Angeles County Jail, Rikers Island, and Cook County Jail. What happened? When community mental health centers weren't built, people with mental illness had nowhere to go. They stopped taking medications. They decompensated. They became homeless. Cities passed laws criminalizing behaviors associated with homelessness: loitering, public intoxication, disturbing the peace. Police arrested people who, 20 years earlier, would have been hospitalized. A 1,985 study tracked 132 former state hospital patients released in Massachusetts between 1975 and 1,980. Of those 132, 47 had been arrested at least once by 1985. Charges: disorderly conduct, trespassing, petty theft, assault, usually minor altercations. None received mental health treatment in jail. They were released, decompensated again, and rearrested. The revolving door. One man, diagnosed with schizophrenia, was arrested 19 times between 1,978 and 1,990. Same pattern every time. He stopped taking medication, became paranoid, yelled at people on the street, got arrested, spent 30 to 90 days in jail, was released, and the cycle repeated. In 1990, he attacked someone during a psychotic episode. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He died in prison in 2003 from a heart attack, never having received adequate psychiatric care. The state closed the asylums to save money, then spent far more incarcerating the same people. Fact number 57. Danvers State becomes Avalon Danvers. We mentioned this earlier, but the story deserves more detail. Danvers State Hospital closed in 1992. The property sat empty for 13 years. Developers purchased it in 2005 with plans to demolish most of the complex and build luxury apartments. Preservationists fought to save the Kirkbride building. They lost. Most of the structure was demolished in 2006. Only the facade remained, incorporated into the new apartment complex. Avalon Danvers opened in 2008. Marketing emphasized historic character and architectural significance. Rental prices: $1,200 to $2,800 per month for 1 to 3 bedroom units. The brochures never mentioned it was a psychiatric hospital, just historic Danvers State Hospital. People didn't ask questions. Then the report started. Residents heard footsteps in hallways at night, doors opening and closing, voices through walls. One resident told police she woke at 3 a.m. to someone screaming. She called 911. Police searched the building. Nobody was screaming. Nobody heard anything except her. It happened again a week later. Same time, 3 a.m. Same screaming. This time, 3 residents reported it. Police found nothing. Between 2008 and 2012, Danvers police responded to 37 calls from Avalon Danvers. All were for suspicious sounds, possible intruder, or unknown disturbance. In 37 calls, Not once was an actual intruder found. A former Danvers state nurse was interviewed in 2009. She said, 3 a.m. was medication time on the locked wards. That's when patients would resist. That's when we'd hear screaming. Residents continue to report incidents. Management refuses to comment. Apartments continue to rent. In 2015, a local paranormal investigation team requested permission to investigate. Management declined. The team investigated from public property outside the building using audio equipment. They claimed to have recorded voices, including one that said, "Still here." Audio analysis is inconclusive. Could be voices, could be wind, traffic, environmental noise, but residents keep hearing screaming at 3 a.m. Fact number 58. Hudson River and the Perpetual Restoration. Hudson River State Hospital's Kirkbride building was saved in 2003. Preservationists celebrated. 20 years later, the building is still empty. Restoration cost estimates started at $50 million in 2003. By 2010, estimates reached $100 million. By 2020, $150 million, mostly due to asbestos remediation. Asbestos is in 80% of the structure. Removal requires specialized contractors, sealed work environments, constant air monitoring. It's expensive and slow. Meanwhile, the building deteriorates. Every year of delay causes more damage. Roof leaks destroy plaster. Water damages structural beams. Mold spreads. Preservationists keep raising money. So far, they've secured $8 million in grants and donations. That's enough to stabilize the exterior, but nowhere near enough for full restoration. The building is occasionally opened for tours. Professional guides lead small groups through safe sections. They warn visitors. Wear closed-toe shoes. Watch for debris. Don't touch anything. Tour guides report strange occurrences. Cold spots in specific rooms. Equipment malfunctions. One guide's flashlight dies in the same hallway every single tour, even with fresh batteries. Environmental engineers blame magnetic fields from old electrical wiring. The hospital had its own power plant. Residual electromagnetic interference could affect electronics, or something else is interfering. One tour guide quit in 2019. She wouldn't explain why, just said, "I don't like the second floor ward. Something's wrong up there." The second floor ward is the old hydrotherapy wing. It's off limits to tours now due to structural concerns. The temperature there remains 62 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Engineers can't explain it. Fact number 59. Norwich becomes forest. Norwich State Hospital in Connecticut closed in 1996. Most buildings were demolished in 2009. 2 structures remain. The property was sold to developers who planned a housing complex. The recession in 2008 killed the project. The developers went bankrupt. The property returned to the state. Now it just sits. The forest is reclaiming it. Vines cover the walls. Trees grow through windows. Roots are slowly breaking the foundations. In another 20 years, the buildings will be indistinguishable from the landscape. Urban explorers visit regularly. They post videos and photographs online. The interior is a time capsule. Patient files scattered across floors. Medical equipment rusting in corners. Gurneys overturned in hallways. One explorer found a restraint chair in 2014, still bolted to the floor. Around the chair, scratches in the linoleum formed words, "Help" repeated approximately 50 times. The scratches had worn through to the concrete, suggesting years of consistent abrasion. Someone spent a very long time in that chair, scratching the same word over and over. Could be a hoax. Urban explorers staged scenes for views, but the linoleum was original, 1904 construction. The scratches showed oxidation consistent with decades-old damage. If it's real, someone was restrained in that chair long enough to wear through quarter-inch linoleum into concrete. The explorer who found it reported it to Connecticut State Police. They investigated and concluded, no evidence of recent criminal activity. Historical artifact. The chair is still there, still bolted to the floor, still surrounded by the word "help" scratched 50 times into the ground. Fact number 60. Greystone's hidden rooms. When Greystone Park in New Jersey was demolished in 2015, workers found rooms that didn't appear on blueprints. The Kirkbride design was highly standardized. Every room, hallway, and staircase was documented in architectural drawings, but demolition crews found spaces between floors, accessible only through locked panels in utility closets. One hidden room contained restraint equipment. leather straps, chains, metal cuffs, all bolted to the floor and walls. No windows, no ventilation, approximately 8 feet by 10 feet. Why wasn't it on the blueprints? Either the blueprints were incomplete, or the room was added later and never documented. Another hidden space contained children's shoes. Hundreds of pairs, small sizes, lined up against a wall. The children's ward was on the opposite side of the building. Why were they there? Nobody knows. No records explain it. The demolition supervisor reported the findings to New Jersey State Archives. Then demolition continued. The rooms were destroyed. The restraint equipment was disposed of. The shoes were collected and placed in storage. A researcher requested access to the shoes in 2018. The archives couldn't locate them. The inventory listed them as transferred to historical collection. Location TBD. They're missing. Hundreds of pairs of children's shoes, collected from a hidden room in a demolished asylum, now lost in bureaucratic storage. Or maybe they were never transferred at all. Maybe someone decided the shoes raised too many questions. Fact number 61. Buffalo State and the $40 million problem. Buffalo State Hospital contains 1,200 tons of asbestos. Removal cost, $40 million minimum. New York State doesn't have the funding. The building can't be demolished safely without asbestos removal. It can't be renovated without asbestos removal. So it sits, slowly collapsing. Parts of Buffalo State have been restored and repurposed. The Richardson Olmsted campus, named for architect H. Richardson and landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, includes a hotel and event spaces. But the abandoned wings remain dangerous. Unauthorized entry is trespassing, but urban explorers ignore the warnings. In 2017, a 22-year-old man fell through a rotted floor in one of the abandoned wings. He dropped 15 feet into a basement storage room. Fractured leg, broken ribs, punctured lung. His friends called 911. Rescue took 4 hours because crews had to navigate unstable floors to reach him. He survived, but faced criminal trespassing charges. During recovery, he gave an interview. He said, "The building feels alive. I know that sounds crazy, but it does. Like it's watching you." Investigators asked if he was under the influence. He said no. Toxicology reports confirmed it. He just felt watched. Other explorers report similar sensations. Feelings of being followed, hearing footsteps behind them, turning around to find nothing there. Skeptics note that old buildings create sounds, settling foundations, whine through broken windows, animal activity. The human brain interprets these sounds as human presence, but the reports are consistent. Same descriptions, same locations, same feeling, being watched. The abandoned wings will likely never be restored. Too expensive, too dangerous. They'll stand until they collapse on their own, which structural engineers estimate will happen within 20 to 30 years. Buffalo State will slowly fall down, and whatever's inside will fall with it. Fact number 62. Trans-Allegheny's profitable ghosts. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia is now a business, a profitable one. Ghost tours generate approximately $1.2 million annually. The building is being restored using that revenue. Suffering has become commerce. Is that exploitation or preservation? Both arguments have merit. Without the ghost tours, the building would likely have been demolished. It was scheduled for demolition in 2007 when private owners purchased it specifically for paranormal tourism. The tours fund restoration. 15 years of tour revenue has repaired the roof, stabilized foundations, and restored several wards. The building is in better condition now than it was in 1994 when it closed. But it's also a carnival. People pay to be scared. They laugh in hallways where patients suffered. They take selfies in rooms where people died. One tour guide quit in 2016. She said, "People treat it like a haunted house. They don't understand this was real. Real people suffered here, and we're profiting from it." Other guides defend the tours. They argue that keeping the history alive, even through paranormal tourism, is better than erasing it. Both perspectives are valid. Trans-Allegheny hosts flashlight tours, ghost hunts, overnight investigations. Prices range from $25 for basic tours to $300 for overnight paranormal investigations. Thousands of visitors report experiences, voices, shadows, objects moving, overwhelming emotions. Skeptics explain these as suggestion, expectation, and environmental factors. When you pay to experience ghosts, your brain wants to deliver ghosts, but some experiences are harder to dismiss. Multiple independent groups, unaware of each other's reports, describe identical phenomena in identical locations. One popular story: Lily, the ghost child in the children's ward. Dozens of visitors report seeing a small figure, hearing giggling, finding toys moved. Is Lily real? Or is she a collective narrative, created by suggestion and reinforced through repetition? Nobody knows. But Lily generates revenue. The children's ward is the most popular stop on tours. The asylum is profitable because it's haunted. Whether the hauntings are real or imagined doesn't matter for the business model. Fact number 63. The MK Ultra sites they can't confirm. 44 institutions received CIA funding under MK Ultra. 12 destroyed records in 1973. We covered that earlier. But research continues. Investigators have identified some facilities through cross-referencing surviving documents, financial records, and testimony. Confirmed MKU LTRA sites include St. Elizabeth's Hospital, D.C., Ionia State Hospital, Michigan, Vacaville Medical Facility, California, Lexington Narcotic Farm, Kentucky, but others remain unknown. CIA documents reference locations by code. Site 17, Facility K, Location 7. Researchers have tried matching codes to institutions. Some matches are probable, others are speculative. One document, declassified in 1985, references Site 23 and describes experiments involving prolonged isolation and sensory deprivation on institutionalized subjects with diminished legal capacity. Translation: they locked asylum patients in dark rooms for days or weeks to see what happened. Site 23's location remains unknown. Researchers have narrowed possibilities to 3 institutions in the Northeast, all of which closed between 1985 and 1995. Records from all 3 institutions show unexplained gaps. Patient files missing pages, entire months absent from admission logs, financial records with redacted line items. Did those institutions participate in MKULTRA? Possibly. Can it be proven? No. The people who would know are dead. The records are destroyed. The patients can't testify because they didn't know they were test subjects. What remains? Fragments, suggestions, gaps in documentation that might be evidence or might be ordinary administrative incompetence. The truth is buried. Deliberately or accidentally, it doesn't matter. The result is the same. We'll never know for certain what happened in those places. Fact number 64. The patients who were never released. When institutions closed during deinstitutionalization, most patients were transferred or released. Most, not all. A 1,995 audit in Pennsylvania examined closures of 4 state hospitals between 1,985 and 1,992. Records showed 2,847 patients transferred or released, but census records before closure showed 2,964 patients. That's 117 missing people. The state explained: clerical errors, duplicate records, patients who died before closure but weren't removed from census counts. Auditors requested death certificates. They found certificates for 89 of the 117. The other 28 had no death certificates on file. Where did those 28 people go? The state re-examined records and found 14 more death certificates that had been misfiled. Still 14 unaccounted for. Further investigation found that 8 had been transferred to out-of-state facilities. Records existed but weren't initially located. That left 6 people. No death certificates, no transfer records, no discharge documentation. The audit concluded: records likely destroyed or lost during facility closures. No evidence of wrongdoing, but 6 people vanished from state records. Legally, they ceased to exist. No paper trail, no documentation, nothing. This wasn't unique to Pennsylvania. Similar audits in New York, Massachusetts, and California found comparable discrepancies. Dozens, possibly hundreds, of institutionalized people disappeared during deinstitutionalization. They weren't released. They weren't transferred. They weren't recorded as deceased. They just vanished. Fact number 65. The homeless crisis they created. 1,980. Estimated homeless population in America, 100,000 to 200,000. 1,981. Estimated homeless population, 600,000 to 700,000. What happened? Deinstitutionalization without infrastructure. A 1,988 study examined homeless populations in 5 major cities: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia. Researchers interviewed 1,200 homeless individuals. Findings: 38% had serious mental illness. Of those, 73% had been institutionalized at some point. Most were released during the 1,970 seconds and early 1,980 seconds. The pattern: release from institution, attempt at independent living, failure to maintain housing or employment, return to homelessness. Why did they fail? No support systems, no case management, no medication oversight, no stable housing. One man, interviewed in Boston in 1987, had been released from Danvers State Hospital in 1978. He was 34 years old, diagnosed with schizophrenia. He received a prescription for medication, $200 in gate money, and directions to a boarding house. No follow-up appointments, no social worker, no support. He took the medication for 3 months until the prescription ran out. He didn't know how to get refills. He stopped taking it. Within 6 months, he was homeless. He'd been homeless for 9 years when interviewed. He said, "At least at Danvers, I had a bed. I had food. I had people who knew my name." The asylum system was dehumanizing, but the alternative, for many, was worse. Homelessness with untreated mental illness is its own kind of institutionalization. The institution is the street, the attendants are police, the treatment is jail. Deinstitutionalization was supposed to be liberation. For too many, it was abandonment. Fact number 66. The ones who wanted to stay. Not everyone wanted to leave the asylums. Some patients had lived institutionally for 40, 50, 60 years. It was the only life they knew. When Pilgrim State Hospital began downsizing in the 1,970 seconds, staff encountered resistance from long-term patients. One woman, 71 years old, had been at Pilgrim since 1932. She was 23 when admitted. She'd spent 48 years there. Staff told her she was being moved to a group home. She refused. She said, "This is my home. I don't want to leave." Legally, she couldn't stay. The wards were closing. She was moved to a group home in 1980. She died 3 months later. Cause of death, pneumonia. But her caseworker said she died of displacement. She lost the only home she'd ever known. This happened repeatedly. Patients who'd adapted to institutional life, who'd found stability within the structure, were forced into community settings they couldn't navigate. A 1,982 study tracked 200 long-term patients, 20-plus years institutionalized, who were released during deinstitutionalization. Within 5 years, 23% were reinstitutionalized, hospitals or nursing homes. 31% were homeless. 18% had died. 28% were in stable housing group, homes or supported living. Only 28% successfully transitioned. The majority failed, suffered, or died. Deinstitutionalization was the right moral choice. Keeping people locked up for decades in horrible conditions is wrong, but implementation failed the people it was meant to help. The institutions closed before alternatives existed. People were released into freedom they couldn't handle. Some patients knew this. They begged to stay. They were forced to leave anyway. Freedom without support is just abandonment with better branding. Fact number 67. The files they found during demolition. When asylums were demolished, workers frequently found patient records in unexpected places. Greystone, 2015. Files in wall cavities, hidden during construction. Norwich, 2009. Boxes of records in the basement, water damaged but partially legible. Danvers, 2006. Patient files in the attic, preserved by dry conditions. Why were records hidden? Sometimes accidental, misfiled during chaos of operation. Sometimes intentional, documents someone didn't want found. At Byberry in Philadelphia, demolition in 2006 uncovered a locked room in the basement. Inside, filing cabinets containing 3,000 200 patient records from 1920 to 1945. The records should have been transferred to state archives when Byberry closed in 1990. Instead, they were locked in a basement room and forgotten. The records documented restraint use, experimental treatments, deaths. Some files had pages torn out. In one file, every page referencing a specific 1937 incident was missing, leaving gaps in the chronology. What happened in 1937? The intact portions of other files reference the incident but never describe it. Whatever it was, someone removed the details from multiple files. Pennsylvania State Archives reviewed the Byberry files. They cataloged 3,200 records, noted the missing pages, and stored everything. Researchers can access the files with permission. Most haven't been examined. They're just boxes in climate-controlled storage, full of lives reduced to incomplete documentation. The missing pages are gone. The people who removed them are dead. The incident in 1937 remains unknown. Some histories erase themselves. The question is whether they did it by accident or design. Fact number 68. The fire that destroyed all records. County Asylum, name redacted, Pennsylvania. Operated 1920 to 1955. Population never exceeded 180 patients. Small facility, rural location, minimal documentation in state records. November 3rd, 1956. Fire destroyed the administrative building. All patient records, admission logs, death certificates, financial documents burned completely. The fire started at 2 a.m. Origin, record storage room. Cause officially listed as electrical malfunction. But the building had been empty for a year. Power was disconnected in December 1955 after the facility closed. No electricity meant no electrical malfunction. The fire marshal's report, preserved in county archives, notes this contradiction. In handwritten margin notes, the fire marshal wrote, "Power confirmed, disconnected. Cause undetermined. Possible arson." No investigation followed. The building was demolished in 1957. The land was sold to a private developer who built a shopping center. Today, a strip mall occupies the site. The asylum is completely erased. No blueprints survive. No photographs. No patient lists. Only 3 pieces of evidence confirm it existed. 1. A 1921 deed transferring land to the county for institutional purposes. 2. A single photograph from a 1934 county fair showing the building in the background. Sen. Testimony from 3 elderly residents who remember it. The oldest resident, interviewed in 2003 at age 89, remembered being forbidden to go near the asylum as a child. She said, "We were told to stay away. People who went there didn't come back." Asked what she meant, she said, "I don't know. That's just what everyone said." The asylum existed for 35 years. At least 1,000 patients must have passed through, based on average institutional populations. None of them appear in any records. They vanished with the fire. Fact number 69. The tuberculosis sanatorium that became an asylum. Coastal Tuberculosis Sanatorium, Maine. Built 1917 on an isolated peninsula, designed to treat tuberculosis patients with fresh ocean air and isolation. By 1940, tuberculosis treatments improved. Sanatoriums became obsolete. The main facility was quietly repurposed as a psychiatric asylum. No official announcement, no documentation of the transition. It operated as an asylum from 1940 to 1960. Then it closed. The building was demolished in 1962. By 1965, it was removed from town maps. How do we know it existed? A researcher in 2008 found a reference in a 1947 letter from a Maine state legislator. The letter mentioned the coastal facility and discussed budget allocations for involuntary patients. Cross-referencing revealed the tuberculosis sanatorium's location matched the letter's description, but no other records mentioned psychiatric use. Town records from the area show unexplained population fluctuations. In 1945, the census listed 340 residents in the coastal district. In 1950, 187 residents. In 1955, 412 residents. Those numbers don't match normal demographic patterns. The researcher hypothesized the fluctuations represented patient populations being counted then not counted, then counted again depending on census methodology. Local residents over age 70 remember the facility. They describe seeing buses with barred windows, hearing screams across the water on quiet nights, being warned to stay away from the peninsula. But official records show only a tuberculosis sanatorium that closed in 1940. Either those records are incomplete, or an entire town is remembering something that never happened. Fact number 70. The children's colony that disappeared. Location redacted. Texas, 1925 to 1953. A facility for feeble-minded children operated by a religious organization, not the state. The organization kept minimal records. When the facility closed in 1953, all documentation was supposed to transfer to Texas State Archives. Nothing was transferred. The organization disbanded in 1955. Its assets were liquidated. The facility was demolished in 1956. A historian researching eugenics in Texas found a single reference in a 1932 church bulletin. The bulletin mentioned fundraising for the children's colony and listed 47 residents. Property records show the religious organization owned 120 acres from 1925 to 1954. Satellite imagery from 1,953 shows building foundations on the property. By 1957, the land was cleared. The historian interviewed elderly former church members. Two remembered the facility. Both said children were sent there for permanent care. When asked what happened to the children when the facility closed, both said, "I don't know. We weren't allowed to ask questions." Texas state records have no documentation of 47 children being transferred anywhere in 1953. Either they were transferred and records were lost, or they were never transferred at all. The property is now a cattle ranch. The owner knows nothing about its history. When told about the children's colony, he said, "Sometimes, when I'm fixing fence on the North 40, I find old bricks, foundation stones. Never thought much about it. 47 children, 28 years of operation, 0 documentation, erased." Fact number 71. The Island Asylum, 1902 to 1934. An asylum on a small island off the coast of state redacted, accessible only by boat. It appears in state records from 1902 to 1920. After 1920, no documentation, but local fishermen insist it operated until at least 1934. They remember seeing boats delivering supplies, seeing figures on the island, hearing bells ringing from the island's chapel. The island is privately owned now. The owner purchased it in 1958. He found building foundations, a cemetery with 23 unmarked graves, and remnants of a pier. He also found something else, a metal box buried near the main foundation. Inside, a handwritten ledger covering 1920 to 1934. The ledger documented patient admissions. Names, ages, admission dates, no discharge dates, just admissions. Between 1,920 and 1,934, the ledger recorded 187 admissions. The cemetery had 23 graves. Where did the other 164 patients go? The owner donated the ledger to the state archives in 1997. Researchers cross-referenced the names against state records. Of 187 names, only 12 appeared in any state documentation. The other 175 people don't exist in official records. They weren't transferred to other facilities. They weren't released to families. They weren't recorded as deceased. One researcher attempted to contact descendants of the 12 identified patients. She located family members of 4. All 4 families told the same story. Their relative was sent to the island for mental illness and was never heard from again. The families assumed they died there, but only 23 graves exist. The island owner refuses to allow archaeological investigation. He says, "Some things should stay buried." The ledger is in state archives. The 175 missing people remain missing. Fact number 72. The facility that existed only in budget documents, 1938 to 1969. State redacted, budget documents show line item allocations for Northern Regional Facility. Annual allocations, $120,000 to $340,000. Depending on the year, approximately $2.5 million to $7 million today. But the facility doesn't appear in any other state records. No admission logs, no staff employment records, no inspection reports. A researcher noticed the budget anomaly in 2012. She filed Freedom of Information requests for documentation on the Northern Regional Facility. The state responded, "No records exist beyond budget allocations." She pressed further. The state archives conducted a thorough search. They found one additional document, a 1945 memo referencing population transfer to NRF, without explaining what NRF was. The memo was filed with documents from a state hospital that closed in 1972. It mentioned transferring 14 patients to NRF in March 1945. Those 14 patients disappear from all records after that date. The researcher attempted to trace the money. Where did $120,000 annually go for 31 years? State financial records show the money was allocated, but not where it was spent. The budget line existed. The facility receiving the money didn't exist in documentation, or it existed and was deliberately kept off official records. Why would a state operate a secret asylum? One theory: it held patients whose families wanted them disappeared. Wealthy families, politically connected families, paying the state to hide inconvenient relatives. Another theory: it was a clerical error that persisted for 31 years, and the money went somewhere else entirely. A third theory: it was a CIA black site, funded through state budgets to avoid federal oversight. All three theories are speculation. The truth is unknown. The money existed. The facility, officially, did not. Fact number 73. The ones they buried in the woods. 1,950 seconds to 1,970 seconds. State redacted. Multiple former asylum employees, interviewed independently between 1,995 and 2010, described the same practice. When patients died and no family claimed the body, they were buried on asylum grounds. This was standard practice, documented in many institutions. But these employees described something else: burials beyond the official cemetery. One former groundskeeper, interviewed in 2003, said, "Sometimes we'd get orders to bury someone in the woods. Not in the cemetery, out in the trees where nobody would look." He estimated this happened 15 to 20 times during his employment, from 1963 to 1978. When asked why, he said, "I don't know. I didn't ask. I just dug where they told me." Another employee, a nurse who worked from 1956 to 1971, described similar burials. She said, "Certain patients, when they died, they didn't go to the morgue. They went straight to the groundskeeping shed. We were told to adjust the records." Adjust how? Mark them as transferred, or escaped, anything except deceased. These testimonies came from 3 different institutions in the same state, separated by 60 to 200 miles. The employees never met. They described identical practices. In 2015, ground-penetrating radar was used at one of the institutions. Researchers found 37 burial-consistent anomalies in wooded areas beyond the documented cemetery. The state allocated funding for excavation. Work began in 2017. So far, 11 sets of human remains have been recovered. Forensic analysis dated them to the 1,950 seconds, 1,970 seconds. None of the remains match missing person reports. DNA testing is ongoing but has yielded no identifications yet. 11 bodies found, 26 anomalies remaining. Who were they? Why were they buried secretly? The employees who could answer are mostly dead. The ones still living claim not to know. The bodies keep emerging from the woods. Fact number 74. The CIA connection they can't prove. We mentioned MKUltra earlier, but there's another program, Bluebird, later renamed Artichoke. Declassified documents show Bluebird Artichoke involved experiments on expendable subjects, meaning people whose disappearance wouldn't be investigated. Where do you find expendable people? Asylums, prisons, and orphanages. One document, declassified in 2001, references Facility 7 and describes experiments involving prolonged isolation, sensory deprivation, and chemical interrogation on subjects with diminished legal standing. Facility 7's location is unknown. Researchers have identified 12 asylums with unexplained CIA payments between 1,950 and 1,973. Payments labeled research grants or equipment procurement with no details. Those 12 asylums all have something in common. They destroyed records in the 1,970 seconds, citing storage constraints or water damage or administrative reorganization. One asylum received $87,000 from a CIA front organization in 196 to approximately $900,000 today. The payment was for psychiatric research. What research? No documentation survives. That asylum closed in 1989. During demolition in 1994, workers found a room in the basement, soundproofed walls, one-way mirror, restraint equipment, and one other thing, a logbook covering 1961 to 1965. The logbook documented experimental sessions with subjects identified only by number, dates, durations, substances administered, referred to by code names, and outcomes. Outcomes were usually listed as subject responsive or subject non-responsive. 23 entries ended with subject expired. The logbook was turned over to state authorities. It was forwarded to the CIA under the Freedom of Information Act. The CIA confirmed the logbook was authentic, but declined to declassify any related materials, citing national security. The 23 subjects who expired? Unknown. The asylum's patient death records for that period show only 14 deaths. Either the logbook documented patients who died but weren't officially recorded, or it documented people who were never patients at all. The CIA won't comment. Fact number 75. The mass grave they found in 2019. State redacted, 2019. Construction crew preparing to build a shopping center. Ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies. Excavation revealed a mass grave. 127 sets of human remains in a single pit, 15 feet deep. Forensic analysis dated the remains to the 1,950 seconds, 1,970 seconds. The property had been part of a state asylum that closed in 1982. The asylum cemetery was on the opposite side of the property. It contained 340 documented graves. These 127 people were buried separately, in a mass grave, with no markers. Who were they? Researchers cross-referenced the asylum's death records. Between 1,950 and 1,980, the asylum documented 298 patient deaths. The cemetery held 340 graves. The math didn't add up before the mass grave was found. After 340 plus 127 equals 467 graves, but only 298 documented deaths. That's 169 undocumented deaths. Or the death records are incomplete, or some of the graves hold multiple bodies, or some of the bodies aren't from the asylum at all. DNA analysis is ongoing. So far, 43 of the 127 remains have been identified through DNA matching to living relatives. Of those 43, families provided consistent testimony. Their relative was institutionalized, and they were told the person died. But they were never given a body. They were told cremation had occurred, even though the asylum had no crematorium. The families were lied to. The bodies were buried in a pit. Why? Cost savings. Individual burials were expensive. Mass graves were cheaper. But that doesn't explain the 169 discrepancy. The state is continuing investigation. Progress is slow. Most families don't know their relatives might be in that pit, and 84 of the 127 bodies remain unidentified. Fact number 76. The ledger that listed only first names. 2007. Estate sale in state redacted. Among items auctioned, a leather-bound ledger, origin unknown. A collector purchased it for $15. When he examined it, he found it was a patient ledger from an unidentified asylum, covering 1943 to 1957. The ledger listed patients by first name only. No last names. No patient numbers, just Mary, admitted April 1943. John, admitted November 1944. Approximately 240 entries. Most had admission dates. None had discharge dates. 37 entries had notations. Transferred, escaped, or deceased. The remaining 203 entries just ended. No notation, no explanation. The collector contacted state archives in the state where he purchased the ledger. Archivists couldn't identify which asylum the ledger came from. The handwriting was analyzed. It matched handwriting samples from 3 different institutions, suggesting the ledger was either maintained by someone who worked at multiple facilities or was compiled from multiple sources. Why would someone create a ledger with only first names? One theory: it documented patients whose families paid for anonymity, wealthy families institutionalizing relatives without creating official records. Another theory: it documented illegal admissions, people committed without proper legal process. A third theory: it's fiction, someone's creative writing project that ended up in an estate sale. But the paper and ink were tested. Both date to the 1,940 seconds, 1,950 seconds. If it's fiction, it's very elaborate fiction. The ledger is now in a private collection. The collector allowed researchers to photograph and transcribe it. The transcription is available online. People have attempted to identify the 240 patients using only first names and approximate dates. It's nearly impossible. Mary, admitted April 1943. That could be 10,000 different women. Fact number 77. The files they're still classifying. Today, right now, there are patient files from closed asylums that remain classified, not lost, not destroyed, classified, marked confidential, or sealed by court order or restricted access. Why? In most cases, patient privacy. Federal health privacy laws protect medical records for 50 to 100 years after death, depending on state. But some files are classified for other reasons. Files connected to CIA research programs, classified indefinitely under national security provisions. Files containing testimony about abuse, sometimes sealed by legal settlements requiring non-disclosure. Files documenting illegal sterilizations. Some are sealed because they name prominent families who paid for the procedures. A researcher filed FOIA requests in 2018 for patient records from 3 closed asylums. She received partial responses. Of 4,200 patient files requested, she received *2,100 fully released, *1,400 partially redacted, *700 fully withheld. Reasons for withholding: patient privacy, 340 files, legal settlement confidentiality, 180 files, national security, 87 files, other 93 files. National security: for asylum patient files, that means CIA involvement, either directly through MKUltra, Artichoke, or indirectly through other programs. The 87 national security files will likely never be declassified. The people in those files are dead. Their families don't know the files exist. The CIA won't acknowledge them. And those are just the files that survived. We don't know how many were destroyed. 77 asylums were erased. But thousands of individual stories within surviving asylums remain erased too, hidden in classified files, buried in mass graves, burned in convenient fires, lost in administrative chaos. The buildings are gone, but the secrets remain. We began tonight with a question. Between 1,840 and 1,980, America built 563 asylums. You can find 486 of them. The other 77 were erased. Were they hiding medical malpractice? Yes. Documented in sterilization records, lobotomy logs, experimental treatment protocols. Were they hiding architectural failures? Yes. Buildings that burned. Buildings where patients died from cold, from fire, from falling through rotted floors. Or did something happen inside those walls that made forgetting easier than remembering? Also yes. Sometimes the erasure was practical. Buildings demolished, records destroyed by water or fire or time. Sometimes it was deliberate. Files classified, graves unmarked, names removed from maps. And sometimes it was collective. Entire communities agreeing not to talk about the asylum on the edge of town, not to ask where the buses went, not to wonder why some people never came back. The 77 asylums are gone. The people who passed through them are mostly dead. The records are incomplete, destroyed, or classified. What remains are fragments. A photograph, a ledger with first names only, a mass grave found during construction, testimony from employees who are now very old and whose memories are fading, and questions. Where did the missing patients go? Why were some buried in the woods instead of the cemetery? What happened at Facility 7? Whose children were those 127 inches, the mass grave? We'll never know the complete truth. Too much time has passed. Too many people are dead. Too many records are gone. But the fragments tell us enough. America built asylums to hide people who made society uncomfortable. Then, when the asylums became uncomfortable, America hid the asylums. Layer upon layer of forgetting. The buildings are erased. But they existed. The people are forgotten. But they lived. The records are destroyed. But something happened. And now you know. Not everything. Just enough. Enough to understand that history has holes. Some are accidents, some are erosion, and some were dug deliberately because what went in those holes was too terrible to remember. Sleep well. Dream of buildings that don't exist anymore. Dream of names that were replaced with numbers. Dream of graves that were never marked. And when you wake up, remember, 77 asylums were erased from American maps. But erasure isn't the same as non-existence. They were real. The people inside them were real. And somewhere, in classified files and unmarked graves and fragments of memory, they still are. Good night.